And I'd like to welcome everyone and greet everyone with the greeting of Islam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And today, inshallah, we have a very special talk on week 17. How can we know the purpose of our life? And we, inshallah, hope to be a very delightful night. And also, we're going to open the floor for, we have questions that people submitted. We're going to have time for those questions, inshallah, to be answered. And also, you can submit your questions. You can send them and put them in the chat. Today we have a very special brother. His name is Brother Abdullah Andalusi, and all the way from England. And inshallah, today he will cover this topic of how we can know the purpose of life. Just a little about him. He's an international speaker, thinker, intellectual activist for Islam and Muslim affairs. His work involves explaining and demonstrating by rational argument the intellectual proofs for the Islamic belief system and promoting the Islamic way of life and Islamic solutions for contemporary problems. On a personal note, Abdullah takes Islamic opinions from the classical Sunni schools of thought, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And also, there's a lot more to say, but I'll keep it brief for now. I will say, subhanAllah, this is one of the more important talks for everyone, inshallah. And also, if you can take notes and follow along and stick around with us, inshallah. And with that being said, I'll pass on to our dear brother Abdullah Andalusi.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu was-salam Nabi Kareem Muhammad wa alihi tayyibin wa sahbihi salihin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. To everyone, the organizers, the attendees, and I want to give my thanks to them for organizing this, and obviously, inshallah, hopefully it'll be beneficial for everybody. I'd also like to just mention that I would say I'm a brother, but not so special. So just an average Joe, as you Americans say. And inshallah, like all of you, we've been enlightened with the Deen of Islam, alhamdulillah, and that's something that we can only ever get izzah by sharing that, inshallah, and obviously trying to uphold that. So anyway, also just to caveat that because it's about 1 o'clock in the morning in the UK, I will be joined by my trusty friend, some Red Bull, so do forgive me for chugging that down, but inshallah it'll keep me sharp during this discussion. So I know that we probably have an international audience, seeing as we have advertised, obviously the organizers and I myself have advertised this event, but I'm probably safe in assuming that we have a lot of was it Floridians, perhaps? Is that how you pronounce it? Or and people from the United States of America. Now, I was made aware that in the United States of America currently, there is a little bit of a concern over rising doubts that Muslims are experiencing. Many Muslims, according to I think it was a Pew poll survey, if I'm correct, or maybe it was a survey of some kind that suggested that up to almost a quarter of Muslims born in a Muslim environmental family have reported to have left Islam. Of course, you have an equal, if not greater, proportion of Muslims coming into it, people coming into Islam, so reverts coming into Islam. That being said, this kind of situation is being replicated, not as severe or intense, but in a similar kind of manner in the rest of the world, in Muslim world, and so on and so forth. There's a number of reasons that this is that is causing this. I'm going to be very brief on this because I want to get straight into the actual discussion on understanding how can we know the purpose of life. So I would say that irrespective of whether a people know the truth or not, how people handle truth over centuries and centuries can really can distort it in many ways, and sometimes people can fail to understand the truth even if they might profess to believe in it, and they're told it, right? So for example, over time many Muslims have learned Islam as a kind of a checklist of doctrines to believe in. They're told it based on blind faith. Generally, they're told that even doubting is wrong, or you shouldn't doubt. This was what and you shouldn't. That includes not answering questions that they might legitimately have, and this has caused obviously this problem to be exacerbated. Also, that many Muslims understand Islam in a very dogmatic way, with in a way that's very oversimplified from maybe centuries of kind of oversimplification, kind of crude understanding for the lay people, which got worse and worse and worse over time, such that it doesn't represent classical Islam and the classical understandings, which scholars in the past would have been shocked to see the level of understanding that Muslims have today, if they could ever come back forward in time to see this time. So there is a bit of a disconnect there, and many Muslims believe Islam is is to be this case. It's just a natural case, and many people leave Islam because they are taught Islam in such a way that, and just to illustrate this point, for example, they're taught in such a way that there's just misunderstandings of Islam itself. So I remember there was this one ex-Muslim reported that one of the things that didn't make sense to them about Islam was how it portrayed the history prior to the coming of Islam in 7th century Arabia amongst the pagan Arabs. He said, it was said that they used to bury alive all daughters. All daughters were buried alive. But then how would they reproduce, right? How would they actually have women to reproduce with? That doesn't make any sense. Whereas, no, that's not what happened. What happened was that it was the firstborn daughters of the pagan Arabs. It was a big shame if the firstborn of the family, which would be the head of the family, which was going to be the head of the family, was actually a female and not a male. And this wasn't occurring with every single Arab family, of course, but generally, if you were nobility or you were a respected middle class, so to speak, there'd be a great social pressure on you to look like your family is strong, and a strong family in pagan kind of culture was that it has to be the firstborn being a male. And you can see this replicated, not in exactly the same way, obviously, but this female infanticide is quite prevalent amongst certain polytheistic cultures, like, for example, in India, as well as in China, female infanticide, not necessarily killing children after they're born, although that can happen, but usually abortions when now, because obviously medical science has allowed people to discover what the gender is of the child before the child is born. Anyway, my point is this, that the understanding of Islam itself has become ossified, oversimplified, and doesn't resemble classical Islamic understanding. So my point is, today, I'm not going to be bringing in anything new at all whatsoever. The only thing new is perhaps explaining this in 21st century English language from the UK. That's the only new, if even that. So this isn't, inshallah, but let's get on to the actual topic. So as for non-Muslims, I hope there's some non-Muslims have attended today just out of curiosity. And if you are from a Muslim background, but you are no longer Muslim, I also invite you to kind of open your mind to kind of looking into these questions. But really, I wanted to kind of explain something. How to understand the purpose of life. It's really based on a lot of the revert experience, you could say. Many reverts to Islam who don't speak Arabic and would not understand the linguistic miracle of the Quran. I became Muslim. I didn't even know there was a linguistic miracle of the Quran. It wasn't. I was at a time when it wasn't many English books on that subject, if at all. And when I became Muslim, there was no discussion. I only discovered it later on in time when there was books coming out about linguistic miracle of the Quran. The scientific miracles of the Quran again came a bit later after I converted to Islam. But many reverts to Islam don't become Muslim because of the alleged scientific miracles in the Quran or the linguistic miracle of the Quran. They become Muslim because, and they will report this as it makes sense. Islam makes sense to them, or they recognize it in some way. It would say it seems like this would be the explanation that explains everything that they can observe. That it's very intuitive for most these reverts. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, look, if there's a purpose of life, why does it need all this philosophy and all this research and study just to arrive at it, right? That doesn't make any sense, right? Like, why can't it just be simple? Well, here's the thing. It actually is very simple. It's extraordinarily simple. In fact, when I was first considering Islam, I initially didn't think it might have any answers because it was simple. It seemed to be this, deceptively simple, because I was told by the culture I was raised up in, due to the films and the books, and just some rich people's flirtation with Eastern philosophy and spirituality, and getting enlightenment after spending decades doing meditation, and those kinds of expectations made me believe, with a false conception, that somehow to find the truth will take years and years and years of contemplation, and will take advanced philosophies using jargon which most people don't understand. But that wouldn't make any sense. So how comes then the average person can't access the truth then, or doesn't have the time to access the truth, or it doesn't, that wouldn't make any sense generally. So, but the truth is actually very simple. And if you were to say it to a child, and that's why I think many Muslim children growing up, they don't have so much the kind of cognitive dissonance that you might get in other religions, people from other religions, because it just seems very almost straightforward and obvious into the fact, like, oh, well, there's one God over everything that exists. Everything doesn't make itself. It was made by this one God who controls everything. Everything seems to fit together. So there can't be multiple gods. And of course, we were made, we have a life, we have choice, we have our thinking ability. We have to put all these things into practice to do things in glory, to glorify God, because everything was created by him, and by default is a glorification of him. It's a very simple understanding. But why people today think that's not so persuasive is not because there's some kind of incoherence in that. No, it's because those who don't want to believe it and be under account, accountable for their actions under a God who created everything, maybe because they've embraced individualist ideologies, maybe it's just because as an individual they just don't want to be under anything higher than their own desires. For a number of psychological reasons, people, instead of submitting to what their intellect tells them to submit to, instead they make their intellects in a way submit to them and become a tool for them to try to mentally compartmentalize, or to make a confusion to avoid the truth. They first lie to themselves. It's not like some conspiracy that they are trying to, I must lie to everybody else. No, the first lie is lying to themselves. I want to give an analogy. Not everyone probably understands it, but it's a great example, which is, there's a film called Inception. Don't know if everyone has heard of that film or seen that film. It's about people hacking dreams and getting into people's subconscious by hacking minds, so to speak, and putting them to sleep and then entering in their minds via dream states and so on. So it was that kind of thing. Now, apparently, in this kind of movie, the subconscious of any individual doesn't like being hacked by interlopers, right? So in order for interlopers to kind of spend some time in that mind without being kicked out by that mind's subconscious, they have to create a virtual world inside the mind and make it into a maze so much so that the subconscious and the figures and representations of someone's subconscious in the form of maybe other people in this dream don't notice these foreigners coming into that person's mind, and they kick them out. So they have to make a maze so they can hide in that maze, and it will take some time for the subconscious to find these interlopers and kick them out. That was basically roughly the plot, kind of, or the mechanism of this dream called Inception. Now, what people who are who call themselves skeptics, right, today like to do is, if they don't want to believe a particular idea, they will try and invent a maze, so to speak, to detach an observation of reality, something that makes sense, from your intellect coming to it. So they make a maze of confusion to say, well, maybe how do we know that the universe, for example, wasn't made by multiverse, didn't pop out of nothing, for example, these kind of things. And then they will try to use, they'll try to twist any area where humans don't have full understanding of, let's say, the current frontiers of science. At any point in human history, they've always used human ignorance to kind of obscure the truth. For example, they'll say, well, quantum mechanics has shown that causality doesn't necessarily follow cause and effect. And it's like, well, no, it doesn't, it hasn't refuted causality. There's no refutation of causality. All there is that you can show that there is cause and effect over great distance, maybe possibly beyond the speed of light reaching from one cause and to the effect. So faster than the speed of light, right? You can, so that is the only thing that's demonstrated. But that cause and effect occur, again, is not refuted. They'll make up speculations like, oh, well, maybe there's something like retrocausality, so a cause can cause its can cause an effect, which will in essence cause itself in some kind of loop. That's not been experimentally demonstrated, and yet again, that's just a speculation. And because you don't know about quantum mechanics, let's say, you'll fall into that mistake. You'll think, okay, well, maybe that could be the case. I don't know, right? Even though it's irrational and it doesn't make any sense. Now, people, then they would say things like, oh, science has proven that human intuition is contradicted by empirical evidence, by what you can observe. So whenever humans expected something else happened, so you can't trust the intuition. I call this anti-rationalism, so the attempt to refute or deny rationality in the mind. And again, no, that's also false. What's happened is that all that experiments have ever shown throughout human history is that human assumption has been wrong, but not the law of non-contradiction has never been contradicted, for example, right? Causality has never been breached. And I always give a typical example of this when, for example, the ancient Greeks believed that obviously the bodies, the kind of celestial bodies orbited the Earth, so the geocentric model. And because if they're orbiting, if they're going around, the perfect shape for going around is obviously a circle. Therefore, the celestial bodies orbit the Earth via a circle, in a circle shape, in a circular motion. The problem is that when they observed where these bodies were meant to be, they weren't there. They were in positions that didn't make any sense. And so they had to bend their calculations to fit it, but it never made sense to them. Now, if you were, let's say, a skeptic or an atheist back then, if there was a skeptical atheist back then who was trying to undermine rationality, they'd say, oh, look, you see, this proves that rationality doesn't make, cannot be proved. In fact, rationality is contradicted by observation. It's like, what? No. Rationality hasn't been contradicted by observation. Neither is there contradiction in the universe, but the assumption by the ancient Greeks that these celestial bodies would have orbited the Earth. That's assumption one. And assumption two, that the orbit must be circular. These are just assumptions. Rationality doesn't mandate any of these assumptions. Rationality doesn't necessitate any of those two assumptions. It's just assumptions. And all that science has ever shown is that human assumptions about how the universe works have been wrong multiple times. Likewise, so we call the universe the ayat of Allah, right? You could say that the signs of Allah, right? The signs of the Creator. Also, the ayat also can mean a verse, right? It can be referring to a verse of Quran. The other ayat of Allah, which is the Quran, is much the same way. I would say that if something doesn't make sense, and I've always found this, if something appears not to make sense, I always discover that it's nothing to do with any mistake or error in the Quran or in Islamic beliefs based on clear text and definite texts, but rather it's the assumptions we made or the assumptions you were taught about those texts that were wrong. And inshallah, I'm going to be answering a number of questions to show you where these hidden assumptions were. I once saw this documentary. It was called The Medieval Mind, and it was about Christian Europe during the Dark Ages, quote unquote. And it was talking about all the kind of superstitions these Christians believed in. They managed to actually convince themselves, some of them, that there was a race of people who had the heads of dogs, but the bodies of human beings. And then there was discussion about, do they have souls? Can we convert them to Christianity? Where do they exist? Is it the east or the west? It was quite hilarious. But one of the historians mentioned in that documentary that the medieval mind wasn't any less rational than we are today. It was their starting assumptions that perverted their thought. And that is exactly the same case today. I would say that the Islam that you probably were raised with and taught in schools and taught by teachers, which were just maybe teaching very simple and unsophisticated doctrines, which to people who are never expected to think about this stuff, because that's currently, unfortunately, the situation in the Muslim world, and it's very alien to what happened in Islamic history. By the way, our ancestors were much more sophisticated, which would explain our current condition. But I don't want to digress. So let's go on to discussing how can we know the purpose of life through first principles. I will be mentioning verses of the Quran, but only to compare, right? Just by comparison. We're going to start with the assumption that we don't know that Islam is true or correct. I want to also make a caveat that the only reason why this subject would be difficult it wouldn't be like done in just a simple half an hour or 1 hour, or I mean, I'm doing a 10-week course in essence called the Dawah Masterclass, but in essence it's just the elaboration of this one subject. It's because skeptics, atheists, people from the world of religions and critics of Islam have made it that complicated because they've tried to insert many assumptions in and attack Islam, strawman Islam. And in order to kind of deal with those assumptions, you need historical research, textual research. Obviously, many scholars, alhamdulillah, I've worked with many scholars to look into these matters through about 20 years of my life since being a Muslim, as well as physicists, chemists, biologists, every conceivable subject, only because the critics of Islam, in order to trying to avoid obviously accepting the truth for reasons best known to them, which we can discuss later on, are trying to invent reasons to attack Islam and trying to obviously strawman Islam. And many Muslims themselves are defending a version of Islam which is not really traditional, classical Islam, but it's a kind of post-colonial dogmatic version, which unfortunately is why we're having this rampant down. So anyway, let's get into it. There are basically going to be 4 stages to this investigation. So we're going to do it by stages, right? So different stages of our investigation, and we start from a perspective of not knowing anything at all. So let's go into that very quickly. Am I understandable? I was warned by the organizers that my British accent might bedevil you in trying to understand me. I hope I am clear and legible. Is that anyone understand me okay? Is this a good talking speed, or am I speaking too fast?
It seems everyone's saying yes, that they can understand you very fine, and your speed's fine. Jazakallah khair.
Okay, alhamdulillah. Okay, barakallahu feek. Okay, so let's go for this first stage. So basically, I'm not going to get too much into the historical detail of where skepticism came from. It's obviously an ancient Greek school of thought. I've discussed that in a course I did on the history of Western philosophy at the Quran Institute, which is the same place I'm going to be doing this Dawah Masterclass on the 30th of October. But skepticism, the idea was, I suppose, the intention behind it was to try to shave off all these assumptions that have accrued into the human mind from whichever tradition, background, and culture, in order to gain certain knowledge, right? That was, I suppose, its claimed goals. However, in the modern form of skepticism, and one certainly embraced by those who deny theism, who deny God and religion, it's almost deemed as a way of life, not as a tool. And in that sense, it's deemed as that they will just deny everything, or they will say they deny knowledge of everything, unless they have clear and perfect knowledge of all things. Then they, and they have a level of certainty that requires them to be a creator, them to be a divine God that has infinite knowledge. Unless you're that, you can't have certain knowledge, and that's the argument they, in a way, they are in effect making. Right? When you ask them what's the level of criteria for accepting science as certain, they will say, they will disagree as to even that they exist themselves. I don't even know if I exist. Well, I'm going to say this quite bluntly. We know for certain, we each know for certain that we exist, because consciousness, right? Or rather, you're experiencing something. So what's doing the experiencing, right? The very fact that you actually are experiencing something means that you exist, and you can know that for certain. Okay, it doesn't matter if you're living in a matrix or brain in a vat, being controlled by aliens who are putting signals into your brain to make you think you're in a reality, or whatever whatever kind of scenario, or Descartes' daemon, like an evil deity that controls the universe. How do you know that they're not controlling your reality, and so on and so forth? Regardless of that, what you know for certain is that you exist, right? Because you're experiencing something. So that's the first thing. Then from that you build onto the next level, the next pillar, which is, well, you're experiencing something, and you can't control what you're experiencing. Something's coming into your senses, regardless of what if you are a brain in the vat or a computer program or whatever. If you want to believe some eccentric billionaires who think that, living in a simulation. Regardless of that, you're experiencing something outside yourself, right? There exists an outside yourself, right? I don't know if that's clear to everyone. You know that there is something outside yourself. You're not the only thing that exists, full stop. And if you were even the only thing that exists, if you were someone who was born with a coma, but you could think, if that's even possible, but let's just say you all you could see was darkness, you couldn't see anything, and you just know that you exist. The very fact that you didn't bring yourself into existence, and yet you exist, would be again evidence that, or at least rationally, you'd know, well, I don't remember any eternity before this point. There can't be an eternity before this point, because you can't exhaust eternity. You can't finish counting eternity. So you could deduce that even if you couldn't see anything, that you yourself were started by something else. You were created by something else, even if you couldn't see anything at all whatsoever. Right? These are just basic rational points of observation. Now, you do see an outside world, right? So what is this outside world that you're observing? Now, again, people say, well, look, Abdullah, how do you know that you're not living in the matrix? How do you know you're not living brain in the vat? And I say, it's actually, in a way, it's actually irrelevant, because what you're seeing is always going to be real. And what I mean by that is there's always going to be a reality that you're observing. Let's say the matrix, right? So a computer simulation. A computer simulation, these programs that you're observing, and sprites and things, let's just say, they exist somewhere. They exist in a hard drive. They exist by a processor, and switches, ones and zeros, conjuring them in front of you. But they come from somewhere. There is an origin for all things. Right? They don't just pop out of nothing. So there's, even in the matrix, there is the programs you're observing, they have a reality to them. They have an origin to them. Likewise, even if you were in the middle of a fever and you're delirious, okay, and you start hallucinating and seeing things that aren't there, these hallucinations have reality. Right? They have not to scare anyone who's been having that recently, I know. But what I mean by that is they're coming from your subconscious, or from neurons misfiring due to increased temperature in the brain, presumably, if that's the cause of your hallucinating, it's a fever. And they are producing obviously the simulation of images onto your matched with the stimuli coming in from your visual cortex, from your eye. So in essence, it's blending in two different stimuli, one from two different you could say sources. One is from the outside world, and one is from your obviously neurons. But it comes from somewhere. It's being caused by something. That's the point. So all things have a reality. Where there is a confusion, what we mean by the only difference I would say between these different things is the category they fit into. So if you were in a computer program, what you'd be observing, it wouldn't be not real. It would just be something that's not physical outside of the hard drive, right? It would be fit into the category of a virtual program. It wouldn't be something in which is composed of atoms, but composed of how the program would work, pixels, which come from electrical signals, and so on, so on, so on, so on, and so forth. So which are obviously come from a magnetic-based or solid-state hard drive, right? But that's the only difference is how do you categorize? I'll give you another example. You could say unicorns are real, right? You can quote, I suppose people are going to be quoting me. I've just been in this lecture of Abdullah Andalusi, and he's been saying unicorns are real, right? Real, not real in the sense of they exist in the material world, but real as in that they exist as a concept in the human mind, which also, which people have given expression of in drawings, right? That's the reality of it, of unicorns. They don't exist in the material world, but they exist in the human mind as in the form of a concept, right? Or they're no more than a concept. However, you could say that they could also exist as images, right? One of the interesting things is that in the Quran, it describes these false idols and false gods, being burnt in Jahannam, being burnt in hell, and also that describing that these false idols. That's because these idols only exist as stone statues and as concepts, or if fantastical imagining concepts in the minds of people, but they don't exist as creators in the universe. They don't exist as deities at all. So this is how we understand that this is a concept. The concept has a reality, as in the concept exists, but the concept doesn't. But the notion that we're having is not something that relates to something that exists in the material world. So the bottom line is everything has a reality. The question is how you categorize these things, and so on. So even fantasy made up stuff has a reality. It's just that it's not a reality in what we would call the real world, right? Or the material world outside us, or the world beyond. Anyway, so that's that. So we know there's an external world to us. For certain, we know there's an external world to us. You can't control it. And you'll see. I'll explain it later on. Something connected to the fact that you can't more proof that you can't control it. Right. So then what do we observe from this external world, right? Well, regardless of whether what you're observing exists in the physical world or in the computer program, they all share the same qualities, which is what you're seeing is change. You're seeing change. Things aren't static. Things are changing. Things are existing distinct from each other. Right? You're getting sensation of different things. You're not getting only one sensation of only all you can see is just one color. For example, you can see multiple objects or multiple things, regardless of which environment is causing these things to appear to you. These things are distinct from each other. So there's a multiplicity of things. They're changing. You're seeing change occur. So certainly you're undergoing change, or what we call time. And then we can begin asking questions based on these premises that can't be denied, right? Can't be challenged. So if anyone currently we've now refuted nihilism or ontological nihilism. Now we've now refuted that. We've refuted epistemological nihilism, right? So now we've moved, this is stage one. We've moved the bar forward a bit. Now we're going to get to well, what is the ultimate reality behind what we are observing? So we're observing change. Okay, so we're going to ask the question now, what initiates change, or where did, was there an eternity past of change, for example? An eternity past of change, of changing things, all these things, have they always existed? What you're observing, have they always existed? And have they existed for eternity like this? Have you existed for eternity? Well, no, you know that you can't exist for eternity, at least you don't remember existing for eternity. So you know that your memory hasn't existed for eternity. That's the first thing you can deduce. The second thing you can deduce is that an eternity past, and what you mean by that is an infinite past for these finite things that are changed, whatever they are, whatever their reality is. This infinite past, if there was an infinite past prior to this point in time, we would never reach this point in time. What I mean is, imagine you came to this this lecture today and you saw that the organizer said Abdullah hasn't arrived yet. He's not online yet. But wait, he said he'll be there in an infinite amount of time. So just you know, have a sit down, have some tea, and he'll be on. You'll see, well, he won't be on, because if we have to wait an infinite amount of time, and the definition of infinite is basically it can't be counted, it can't be exhausted, then we would never reach the end of infinite amount of time. Likewise, if I said that this lecture will go on for an infinite amount of time, and then you can ask Q&A, would any of you ever get to the Q&A session? Well, no, because you wouldn't have exhausted an infinite amount of time to get to that point. So what you can deduce is that for all this change that you're observing, there was a beginning to it. That's the inescapable truth of that, and you can deduce that for definite. The second thing is substance. What are the things that you're observing made out of? Okay. Now let's assume that the universe you're seeing is real, in the sense of it exists as a material universe outside yourself, of which you are a part of. So in essence, your senses aren't lying to you. If you accept that, just to give an example. So okay, so we see objects. You know, what is this object made out of? Well, it's made out of plastic and water. What's the water and the plastic made out of? Well, they're made out of molecules. What the molecules made out of? They're made out of atoms. Okay, great. What they made out of? Subatomic particles. What they're made out of, and going all the way down to quarks, and then maybe possible types of quantum fluctuation or what have you. Okay, that's fine. And then what are they made out of? So what is comprising them? You start to split it down. The thing is, if there was an infinite amount, or not infinite, but infinite amount of levels below this level of reality. So if you're saying that basically you could split particles down to an infinite amount of smaller and smaller particles or energy packets or what have you, would anything actually have any substance at all? Because if you're saying that you could infinitely split down any piece of substance, what you're in essence saying is that there is no substance, because there's never a point where the buck stops, where the point stops and say, right, now we've got this, we've reached this foundation, this foundation upon which matter is based upon is, and what is defined by. No, in essence, you're saying that matter or substance has no ultimate substance. And it's for the same reason as why we know there's no infinite past. It's called an infinite regress fallacy, which is basically you can't have you can't exhaust an infinite amount of things. So we know there's a start point for the same reason that we know that there's ultimately a fundamental substance, or something fundamental behind all things, which is which gives it reality, which gives it substance, in essence. Now, the question is, of course, what is making this substance? What is this fundamental substance? Like, what is it then? Because if this fundamental substance isn't made of anything, right? What is giving it its properties? Why is it doing what it's doing, in essence, right? If there's nothing inside it that's making it do what it does, then what is giving it these properties? The only, again, I'll leave it just there for a second, but we know there's a fundamental, there must be some kind of ultimate fundamental thing behind all material things, which is maintaining what we observe as substance, whatever it might be, whatever we are observing, but it's maintaining substance. The third thing, the third observation is that what we are observing is finite things. Now, I know I use the word finite. It's not philosophical jargon, of course, but it just basically means that something is bounded, right? So this bottle is bounded by limitations. It doesn't exist outside those limitations, or its effect on the rest of the external world is bounded by, or doesn't exceed its shape or substance, with the possible exception of maybe radiation and gravitational effects. But apart from that, but again, proportionate to its mass, right? So anyway, it has a certain proportion to itself. It's limited to a certain extent. So no, I'm just going to pause that there. Someone asked the question, wouldn't that be saying substance is infinite, not that it doesn't exist? Because technically, if you divide everything more down and more down, it keeps going. It's never going to run out. Okay, so a sister asked, are you saying that substance is infinite? Wouldn't that be saying that substance is infinite? No, I'm saying that substance, I suppose the word means, in a way, substance is referring to, is meaning something, right? There is something there. So if you're saying that you can cut it down infinitely, but never reach anything underneath it, right? There's nothing that is made out of that you could find. For an infinite amount of cuttings, what that's saying is that there's actually nothing there, all right? Because you're basically saying that it can be cut, and there's never anything, you'll never reach a point where you're saying, okay, this is what it's based on. Just to give you an example, it's like saying, you see, I've always given this example, you see a pond, right? And you see a pond and it has water up to a certain level. Okay, maybe it's a very deep pond, you can't see the bottom of the pond. So someone tells you, oh, this pond is called the bottomless pond. They say, why is that? Well, because it doesn't have a bottom, right? It just goes all the way down infinitely. Why wouldn't that make sense for you, right? Why wouldn't that make sense? Reason being is because, well, then you'd say, well, what's keeping it up? And why at that certain level, right? Why it's being kept up at that certain level? What's holding up all this water? If you're saying that it has an infinite bottom, that means there's ultimately nothing holding up the water. Or it's like saying that, you know, there's a branch, you just see a branch and a tree goes all the way down and into the earth, and someone tells you this, it's an infinitely long tree, you just don't see the roots, but it goes all the way down to the bottom, to its roots. And you say, well, if it's an infinitely long tree, it wouldn't have roots, because at what point in the tree is there going to be the roots if it's infinite? Right? At what point going down that tree would you ever reach the roots? And the roots are required to support the whole tree. So if you cut matter or substance down infinitely, and you're saying that it can be cut infinitely, then you're basically saying that matter doesn't actually exist, or substance doesn't exist. Oh, okay. The sister has said that makes sense. You misunderstood what I'm saying. Okay, I'm glad I explained it better. Thank you for the question. So it allows us to kind of elaborate on this matter. Someone says, so limit as x approaches infinity of this function equals 0. I want to try to keep mathematics out of it, just because I want to keep it simple for the average layperson to understand. There is a confusion in mathematics regarding Cantor sets and infinity. Without going into detail, there is no infinity in mathematics. There's only, you could say that it's only a count. Okay, mathematics is just generally a counting rule, right? So it's only as infinite as you can be infinite, which to count, right? Or you have a processor that's infinite to count, which you don't. Basically the decimal system is count count till 9, and then put a 0 and add a 1 and continue. Basically, that is decimal system, and everything based upon that. There's no such thing as the number line that exists as an actual infinite existence. Someone says, can an infinite amount of space, can a finite amount of space, like say 12 inches, be infinitely divided in half, like 12 inches to 6 inches? And the thing is this, you could say, can it be infinitely divided? In mathematics, there would never be a point where you could, where the mathematical system of counting, or in this case, dividing, will not be able to continue dividing, but only as an abstract concept. In essence, if you could infinitely exist for an infinite amount of time doing that, you could then divide going on forever. But divide on a, in an abstract way, you're not actually dividing anything itself. It's a conceptual division, but you're not really dividing anything anyway. That's the point. It's a counting rule. It's a dividing rule. It's a multiplying rule. It's a subtracting rule. That's what the operations of mathematics are. Could you give me a bit and do the question? Okay. All right, Khair, inshallah. I want to continue our discussion. So that's substance, and then as for finitude, the question is, in any object that you observe, where does which is finite, is limited. The question is, what is giving it its limits? So you would say, maybe with this object, its limitation, did it make itself, or was it made by something else? Of course, in this case, it was made by something else. However, if what gives it its limits will also be the substance, right? It's made of something and builds up to this level, to this shape and so on. But if I was to find the most fundamental thing, which is just a finite thing, let's say, and it is limited. Someone asked me a question, how do you know that there's not an eternal limited thing, right? So an eternally existing limited thing. Why is that? Why can that not be the case? Well, the question is, if this finite thing, which is going to be fundamental, so it can't be divided further, and it's limited, where does its limits come from? So if it wasn't made by anything else, that means that it wasn't defined by anything else. In English, defined means, from the Latin definis, means to make it, give it its limitations, right? So if it wasn't given its limitations by something outside itself, that means it's giving its limitations. It's the one that's giving itself these limitations, right? And if it's giving itself its limitations, and it's not made of any energy, it's not made of anything, it's the most fundamental particle, let's just say, or thing. If it can define itself, in essence, then it's not limited at all, because it can choose whatever it wants to be or do. And when we talk about limitation, what does limitation mean? Limitation means the effect of something, right? So if something's power to affect things, either it comes from something else, i.e. it was made by something else, or it comes from itself. And if it comes from itself, if it can choose exactly what effect it wants to produce, if it determines its own effect and is not made of energy, it doesn't have a storehouse of energy, it will deplete if it pushes too far out, or whatever example, right? Then it is really not a finite thing at all. It's something that is infinite, because it can decide what effect it wants to do, to what extent it wants to make that effect. If it determines its own effect, if its effect is determined by something else, that is what we call creation, right? When you make something, and this bottle has an effect, right? It has a certain weight, it displaces a certain amount of air, it obviously causes gravitation due to its mass. It has a certain effect, right? It didn't determine this effect. It was determined by something else to it. But ultimately, there must be something which determined the finite things of everything else, or the finitude, or the effects of all things in creation. We can go more into that, but I don't want to kind of spend too much time on that one thing. And lastly and finally, the fourth thing that we observe from whatever we are observing is specificity, which is that this bottle is not twice the size it is, or half the size it is. It is this specific size with this specific color and shape and form. So the question is, what gave it its limits? Yes, and now what made those limits in that very specific way and not in a different way, right? What determined it, in essence? Now, if you say, well, it was determined by something else, and determined by something else, and determined by something else, and you ask, well, what determined that? What determined that? You can't have an infinite chain of things determining, going back in the past, let's say, because again, you would never get to this object existing. You never get to you existing. So at some point there is something that determines, but itself isn't determined by something else. And that's the only way to avoid contradiction. Someone said, I know the universe is, okay, I'm going to answer a lot more of these questions in the Q&A session, because I want to kind of just get to the end. So, but all these questions, inshallah, we're going to try to go through however long it takes, or however much time I'm permitted by the organizers, but I do want to cover as many questions as possible. So, so basically we get to this point where you have the beginning, the first, something that initiates motion, but itself isn't moved. So, or something that initiates change, but itself is not changed. You've got something that is defining substance, but itself isn't made of a substance. Right? Itself is not made of a substance. It's not divided further. You have to reach a point, and it must be sustaining all other substances, because all other substances, if you break them down, they must reach some fundamental substance. And the fundamental substance, where is it getting its attributes from? Because it's making it is the building blocks of finite things. Itself is finite. So if it is finite, then where is its attributes coming from? Where is its characteristics coming from if it's finite? And its characteristics are originating from where? What is making the smallest particle possible? Maybe we haven't seen it yet, but what is making that smallest particle do what it does, or that superstring vibrate at the frequency it does? What does it even mean to do that? Well, where's that energy coming from? Right? Where is it coming from? If it's the most fundamental thing there is, there's nothing smaller than itself that makes it, it doesn't have any internal mechanisms, then what is making it act in a finite way, not in an infinite way? Right? So why is it only limited in its acting? Then we have to say that the only possible explanation is that what's giving it that motional ability to act when it has no internal mechanism to act is something else that is not finite, like this fundamental particle. So there's something sustaining all substance in the universe. The cause of all finitude, the thing behind everything that's finite must be infinite. It was not determined or limited or created by anything else, because to create is to shape something into its finite form. And so if this thing doesn't have any limitations and it starts to change, it created everything else, then this thing itself is uncreated, because it doesn't have any limitations that require creating. Someone asked me that question, I believe, on the Q&A. And lastly, specificity, which is where did the choice come from to make things in a certain way? How come this universe doesn't have one quark more than it does, or one quark less than it does? And if you were to say, well, Abdullah, how do you know how much maybe the universe is infinite in mass and in energy? Let's just say, because you haven't observed it. Well, I'll say, how comes within the observable universe there is only a certain amount of matter, and not a greater amount or a greater concentration per unit volume in the observable universe? So that's still a question we can legitimately ask. Now, the argument would be from some atheists would be that, well, what determined something is randomness or chance. But randomness doesn't really exist. We know that everything basically, like, where did what caused something to appear in one way and not appear in another way? Right? Now you say randomness, but what does randomness mean? Because we have no conception of randomness. You roll a dice, and you might think it's random, but it's not, because you could calculate the weight of the dice, the air particles or molecules rather, at the time, the exact strength of gravity at that particular point on the Earth's surface, and a whole number of calculations. You could determine with precision, generally speaking, what the result of that dice roll was, what determined that dice roll to be the way it was. But true randomness, we've actually never observed. And also, how could it possibly exist? Because what is causing something to be decided one way and not the other way? So ultimately speaking, there has to be, to avoid any paradoxes in any of these four things, motion, substance, finitude, and specificity, there has to be an origin of motion, an origin of behind all substance, as in a maintainer behind all substance, something that defines things but is in itself not defined, and something that determines the limits of things to their proportion or proportions them, but itself doesn't have a proportion. And really, if you're thinking about something that can initiate change or motion from a state of no change, let's say, and no motion, then what they're doing is they're basically increasing, and I call it increasing from nothing, as in they are producing an increase from absolute nothing, which means that they can create energy from nothing. Because to initiate motion from a state of no motion, when there's no, in the world today, that only happens when you have a force that occurs. So this thing can actually initiate motion from complete standstill, so to speak, which would mean that it has the ability to create from nothing or increase from nothing, and therefore is inexhaustible in power. Power just means the ability to get work done, right? Work done over time, as physicists would say. So this thing has the ability to has infinite power by definition, but itself is not finite or limited, or looks like any creature or created thing. You could deduce this rationally. Now, I've really summarized all these things because of the limits of time, but I mean, there's a reason why I'm doing a 10-week course on this. With diagrams, we'll be going through these philosophical concepts and looking at all the possible contentions that could possibly be argued. Now, the next, and this is kind of going to reach in the first stage, the next stage would be, how do you know, okay, maybe there's an infinite thing that creates, but why is it a God? Why would you say it's a God? Where'd you get that idea from? Now you're just kind of, aren't you begging the question now? That, oh, must be God because it is infinite. Well, no. The reason being is because why did it initiate motion, initiate substance, so to start defining substance, start defining and defining it to a specific proportion? Why did it pick that? Why did it pick doing that? So there are now two possibilities, right? One is this so the atheists, who try to be imaginative, will argue there's a multiverse, right? There's a multiverse that does this. In essence, there's an infinite existence of an infinite universe, or that creates many bubble universes according to one model. Or there's some infinite existence. Let's just say the common denominator is there's an infinite existence which makes multiple finite things, like our universe, our observable universe, and on maybe there's many others, right? So it makes it randomly, just does it randomly. To which I ask, well, what is making this multiverse make universes, right? What is causing it to make universes? So they'll say, now either that, there's two things. One, there's something, so you have this multiverse, and there's something outside this multiverse that's making it, pushing it to make universes, or there's an internal mechanism inside the multiverse that's making it make universes, right? So let's look at the first possibility. If there's something else that's making this multiverse make universes, then the multiverse isn't the origin of creation, it's this other thing. And then now what is that thing? What's making that thing do what it's doing, or something else? And then you just get, again, an infinite regress chain where it wouldn't explain anything and would cause contradiction, a paradox. You'd have to wait an infinite amount of time for all these things to initiate this multiverse to make universes. So there would be no universes being made ever. maybe there's an internal mechanism in this universe that makes it mechanically, like a factory, just produce universes. Okay, but what is making this mechanism then initiate universes, making the multiverse make universes? Or maybe there's a smaller mechanism. Okay, and what's making that mechanism do? Make universes? Oh, an even smaller mechanism. And again, if you want to go smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, as to an infinite, causing another infinite chain of causality, again, nothing would be caused, because it's like saying that you have a watch, and in this watch, what's making the hands move is there's a smaller mechanism inside that watch that's making the hands move. Okay, what's making that mechanism move? Oh, there's a smaller mechanism inside that, and a smaller mechanism inside that, a smaller mechanism going on for infinity. If that's the case, in order for the hand to move, you have to wait an infinite amount of mechanisms to finish making each other, to get to the point of basically making that hand move. The hand would never move. So the multiverse theory collapses because it can't get away from paradoxes, from contradictions, right? And that's the problem. But what is left then? What remains? Well, what remains is that the creator or the originator behind the universe, whatever it is, it initiated creating the universe itself with no internal mechanism, no external pressure making it do that. And what do we call that? If it can initiate it without prior cause, well, we call this choice. And if something has choice, that's the definition of a will. So if something has inexhaustible power, it has power, it's inexhaustible, it can make from nothing, and it has choice, the ability to choose and initiate voluntarily, that's the minimal definition of what we would call God, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Arabic language. And that's how we know there's choice. Now, the second stage, now remember, all this we deduced without knowing that what we are seeing is 100% accurate, right? And I wrote a tweet on my Twitter where I said that the only thing we can truly be certain of is that we exist, and there's an external reality, and ultimately there is a creator behind this external reality and ourselves. That's the only thing we can prove for absolute certain. The philosophical definition of certainty. So empiricists won't like this, empiricists, but that means that basically the God's existence is more certain than your senses. Right. So when people say, I only believe what I see and I doubt God's existence, that's what an empiricist might say, a strict empiricist. But you say actually it's all the way around. You don't know for certain that what you're seeing is entirely accurate or a correct representation of the external world. Whereas the existence of God is the only possible conclusion that avoids any kind of contradictions and is therefore the only thing we can be certain of. And that actually is the kind of how we should be debating with atheists, or if you are an atheist watching this, I mean, this is, I would obviously invite you during the Q&A to please come and challenge, or if you are unconvinced, or you need further clarification, because this is a horrible summary of what I would probably take a few more hours going through more in depth and detail. But I want to get now to, okay, so God made a choice. But as atheists like to argue, which God? Right? Which God made this choice? Right? Who? Is it Thor? Is it Zeus? Who? Which God made this choice? Well, first and foremost, this is actually incorrect. In any culture, in any religion, going back from ancient times to Mesopotamia and so on, the empires of Mesopotamia, there has been commonalities where there are many civilizations, peoples, and religions, including in America, the Native Americans or Native Indians or whatever nomenclature they would choose to define themselves as. They believe, for example, in a world spirit, which created the world and in all intents and purposes is an infinite power and is one power, of course, and has will and has choice. So it doesn't matter what name you call this creator, as long as you believe that this creator is infinite and has a will, you basically believe in the same God that Islam does. And of course, the Quran, when it engages the reader, it expects you, if you noticed how it's worded, it expects you to have reasoned these things, to have been able to recognize these things and how they make sense. The next kind of stage, the second stage of our discussion is now engaging deists and polytheists, right? So the deists would say, well, God exists, okay, has a will, okay, but doesn't care about us. Like, why would God care about us? We are such an unbelievably small speck in an unfathomably big universe, with kind of size comparisons with involving zeros going down to the multiple powers in mathematics, right? It's really unfathomable how small, infinitesimally small we are. Not literally infinitesimally, but certainly small we are compared to the observable universe. As much as the nucleus of an atom is small compared to the electrons that orbit it, in terms of the distance between those things are actually very vast. Very unfathomably vast, almost as big as, almost replicates our size in the observable universe in terms of the vastness and proportionality. So it's very massive scales of small and large in this universe. Why would this God care about us, right? We're so small. To which is argued, well, first and foremost, the deists have made a mistake in an assumption, right? And this is where assumptions come into it. They've made the assumption that God is a limited creature. They've anthropomorphized God. You see, a president or a king of a country doesn't have time to listen to every single person, to know what their lives, what they're doing, to manage them, because there's so many people. And obviously the leader is going to have only a small finite attention span, right? They can't actually see or look over everyone's lives and so on and so forth. But this infinite creator, which can literally create by its own will an entire universe, you'd have to ask the question, which is, if it can create an entire universe as vast as it is intentionally, then intending it in certain level and certain specificity, certain shape, form, and its size, that means everything that exists, including every moment in time, every moment of change, is right now intended by this same creator. I mean, if the universe couldn't make itself, how do you think it could ever sustain itself or be self-sustaining, when its very substance or itself needs to be maintained? Ultimately, its most fundamental substance must be maintained by the power of this creator. And you're saying that the creator doesn't know about us, when the creator intended us to exist and is maintaining us right now. I'm not going to get into Islamic theological debates or discussions, but many classical scholars have pointed out that they say, well, if it's infinite creator, he has infinite knowledge, and he has infinite knowledge, then surely would know about us very intimately, right? Because the knowledge and the attention span of this creator is not finite. But if you want to get more sophisticated into it, you could, depending on which school of thought within Islamic theology you want to subscribe to, others would say that God's will and knowledge are all one and the same thing. So when God willed everything to exist and is now willing to maintain it, that's coterminous with his knowledge. And so whatever he wills to maintain is exactly the extent of his knowledge. And so he knows everything that he's made, and he knows everything that he's maintaining. So he is intimately aware that we exist, and he's intimately aware you specifically exist, and everything that happens in your life, he is intimately intended to happen and knows about. So now that's where we now moved on and breached the deists. Now we've breached past the deists. Now we're going into we're next up against the polytheists, which would say, how do you know there's not more than one God? How do you know that there's only one God? Well, this is for very, very simply, in that if there was more than one infinite power with will, then they would limit each other, right? They would cause limitations upon each other, and they would not be infinite anymore or unlimited. They would just be their effects would be limited thing, would be limited. The Quran uses another interesting argument, which is that if there were more than one power, then the universe would be in a type of chaos whereby the laws of physics would be constantly changing and would produce paradoxes as each creator changes and tries to wrestle with the other to control the universe, basically, if there were multiple powers. Now, this might seem obvious and self-evident, but this is a powerful refutation to polytheists who believe that there are multiple gods, each given a certain speciality. One controls lightning, one controls rain, one controls the fertility, one controls the sun, one controls the moon, but yet they operate under regularities, right? There's regularities in the universe. There's no such thing as, night overtaking the day and so on and so forth, meaning that you don't have these paradoxes that could happen when you have multiple deities with infinite power vying with each other and wrestling with each other. And of course, if something has infinite, so something has infinite will, but is not a finite thing, it doesn't have a physical body that limits its existence. So you can have multiple bodies living together and not, and they can coexist. You'd have an infinite will, which basically has a will over everything. So if something has infinite will and doesn't have a body that bounds itself to one location, let's just say, then how can you have multiple infinite wills? Because how could they coexist at the same time over the same thing if they are both over each other even? So one will would be able to control the other will, right? Because it would have any limits to what its extent or what it could do. So in essence, then the second will would be subordinate to the first will and would not even be a separate will. It would just be in essence a puppet of the first. And what it ultimately means is that you can't get any way you try to conceive of multiple infinite powers produces a paradox or a contradiction, right? And of course, a more simple argument is, if there was more than one God, why? Let's say there was 3 gods. Why 3? Why that number 3? Where did the 3 come from? Why not 4 or 5? Because you have that now enumerated amount. The question is, what determined that amount to be in that number and not less or more? Now, if you go back in human history and you look at different religions, from the ancient Greeks, Aztecs, Mayans are not so ancient, but you look at ancient Chinese religion, you look at ancient Egyptian religion, there's something they share a commonality amongst themselves. There was always a first god, which then created the other gods. If you look at also Hinduism as well, would bear testimony to that. Brahman, the first, the ineffable spirit or power that makes the other gods and creates other gods. I remember once I heard of Hindus celebrating Krishna's birthday, and they call Krishna a god. I was like, how can a god have a birthday? That's very baffling to me. So in this regard, the refutation of polytheism is very clear in Islamic verses, and it would make sense that what we see is that in all these civilizations, we see there's always a first god that creates the other gods. There was never such thing as all these gods existing from eternity, right? They always seem to come in later, be created later in all these different religions, actually, which obviously answers the question, what came first? Polytheism, monotheism. Someone tried to ask a question along the lines of, prior to this lecture, saying that how do you know, why isn't Islam just a evidence of an evolution of human ability to create increasing abstraction over time? And I say, well, because the historical record bears the opposite, monotheism seems to be generally first, at least amongst the formalized religions, and then polytheism, it seems to degrade into polytheism, right? And if you want a great example of this, I would say, with no offense to Catholics here, but Catholicism starts from a religion whereby they believe in one God, which has no statue representing that God. And then they start now praying to saints represented in statues, and each saint has a authority or delegated authority over a particular area. The patron saint of the travelers, the patron saint of healing, the patron saint of wealth, and so on and so on and so forth. And if you're in Mexico, the patron saint of gangsters. Sounds familiar, right? Sounds similar to what we hear from from many polytheisms that we've heard, because ultimately polytheism is the corruption and degradation of an original monotheism. Okay, so we've got through polytheists, deists and polytheists. Now the question, people say, why did God create us? Why did God create the universe? What was the point? What was to be gained from it? The problem with this thinking is, again, you're making the assumption, right? And remember, never make an assumption. I had a teacher at my university, and they wrote on. They said never assume, because this is how he wrote on the blackboard. He wrote, assume. He took the first three letters of that, separated it out, and then took the letter U, and then separated it out and took the two letters M-E, me. He says it makes the first three letters out of you and me, right? We always used to say that to us. Never assume, because it makes a fool out of you. Let's just put it like that, right? So I would say never make the assumption. The devil is in the assumption, and sometimes literally, right? So we assume that the creator makes things because due to motivations that we have. We are creatures that have to survive, reproduce, and of course, that we want to, we feel a need to connect to something higher than ourselves. These are basic human instincts. We assume that the creator must have the same motivations. For us, if someone wants to aggrandize themselves, we say that they have a fragile ego, right? So, oh, you want to aggrandize yourself? You have a fragile ego because something in your survival instinct means that you want to get people's praise so that you can feel that somehow you're protected by people liking you and they will do what you say. And so you will feel more comfortable in the world. You'll feel more secure in the world because inherently you're insecure, right? If a human being demands praise, okay, we make that assumption based on the motivations of what a human being would have. But the creator of the universe doesn't have instincts, of creatures, wouldn't have instincts that would control him or make. I'm going to use the word him. It's not male or female, but it's not a male or female creature. But it's better than saying it, because it could be referring to an animate, an inanimate, an unwilled, mindless thing. Whereas a he just means it has personality. So a personality meaning a will or choice, right? So it can choose, it has a will. So let's call it by a word using a pronoun of personality. So let's just use the word he as a neutral term. Anyway, so why would the creator make everything that exists? Right? Why would the creator do so? Right? What does the creator gain out of it? Does the creator gain sustenance from it? Does the creator gain anything from it? Now, let's look at an explanation that we see in the Quran for this. So in the Quran, there's a verse that says that basically Allah doesn't need anything from his creation, and if he wanted to be satisfied, I'm going to paraphrase the verse. If he wanted to be satisfied, he could find that with himself, right? As in, like, he doesn't lack something. There's nothing that he's lacking. He doesn't feel that he's empty or bored or missing something, such that it could be satiated with creating the universe. And that would make sense, because an infinite thing wouldn't need anything else, and certainly wouldn't get bored, or because boredom is just is a psychological state of human beings, because we have a life force that demands change. So if we don't see change, we get bored, and so on. So anyway, that's a long. I'm not going to go too much into human psychology. So what possible explanation? So what is it? What does the explanation that the Quran brings for this? What does the Quran? How does the Quran kind of produce a discussion? So if we go to see Quran Surah 16, ayah 15 to 17. So that's Quran Surah 16, 15, ayah 15 to 17. You'll see a discussion where the wording of this by the author says, and he has cast into the earth firmly set mountains, lest they should shake with you, and rivers and roads that you may be guided, and landmarks, and by the stars they are also that people are also guided. Then is he who creates like one who does not create. So will you not be reminded? Is the one who creates like the one who doesn't create? In essence, if you had an infinite thing that could create from nothing, increase from nothing, and never does it, is that how is that any different from something that exists that can't create? Right? How is that different from something that exists that has no power to create, if it never chooses to create? Right? If something creates, it certainly demonstrates that it can create. If it does create, right, it demonstrates that. So the verse of the Quran says that, just to kind of again reiterate, so you can think about it. Then is he who creates like one who does not create. So will you not be reminded? Now, one of the amazing things about the Quran is that one verse can be an argument and refutation for multiple audiences and different backgrounds. So this could equally apply to polytheists who worship stone statues and idols, who say, like, is the one who can create everything the same as something that can't create anything, right? Even in their theology, these stone statues couldn't make stuff, or the gods which are meant to be represented by these statues, they didn't make stuff, they just managed stuff, right? But you have the creator of the universe, and in many ancient theologies, you have this creator God. He makes everything, and then he's forgotten about. Right, the Egyptian god Ptah, the ancient Chinese god Shangdi, and so on and so forth. You have, I believe, Kronos in the Greek pantheon. Well, technically, stuff was made. He makes stuff, then gets forgotten about. There's actually a rebellion by his sons against him, and led by Zeus. And anyway, I'm not gonna get into that, but. In all these cultures, and this when historians look at this, they're always quite amazed when you have this creator God who makes everything, makes smaller gods, and then just gets ignored by the, people pick a local smaller god to be the patron god of their city, and they just worship that god. Like Hubal might have been viewed as a patron god of the Quraysh, or some of the clans of the Quraysh, for example, or Athena. Not Zeus, but Athena, and certainly not Kronos, viewed as the patron god of Athens, named after Athena. They forget about these other gods, right? They forget about this. If you asked, I saw this. There was this Hindu politician, was a BJP member, and he basically was asked in an interview. They said it's just a friendly interview with a sympathetic interviewer, of course, and asked him his opinions about things, and he was certainly talking about Muslims in a derogatory manner. And then he was asked about his career, and then he was asked, and what God do you worship? And then he talks about some local god, whatever he worships, like a football team or something. So wait a second, what about Brahman, right? The creator of the universe. What, you're going to ignore him? Why have you forgotten Brahman, right? Anyway, so. But what's interesting in this verse of the Quran, just to rewind it back a minute, is that when God's creation of the universe, first and foremost, what is it a demonstration of? Right? Think about it. Yeah. What is God's creation of the universe a demonstration of? Would anyone like to answer in the comment section? What does it demonstrate? If God creates, what does that demonstrate? He has the ability to create. And the ability to create is a demonstration of his power. Power, it means the ability to affect or to work, to do work. And of course, for God, he can do it inexhaustibly. Or this creator, we know rationally, I'm not referring to Islamic doctrine here. I'm just saying from first principles of our deduction, we know that this thing can create from nothing and increase from nothing and increase energy from nothing, so to speak. Then it certainly has inexhaustible supply. So to make everything is demonstration of his power. So everything that exists, we know is intended, is chosen, therefore has intention behind it. And if it's intended, and we know that it is made by, because its existence is a demonstration of his power, then the intention behind everything that exists simply demonstrates his power. You know this by a different terminology in the English language. You know it as a glorification of God. Everything glorifies God, or is it a evidence, or is an ayat of God, or is a glorification of God. But when you hear the word glorification, sometimes before I go to break anyway, so I'm just going to finish this point, inshallah, because the break's going to come up. But when you hear the word glorification, sometimes you might assume that glorification just means, like, oh, you're so great, you're amazing, and the universe just does that in some inaudible manner towards God, which you could argue in a way it does, but you look at it through an anthropomorphic lens. You think, I don't get it. God wants us to create things to say he's great. Like, that just sounds like stroking one's ego if a human being were to do it, right? But no, that's a very unsophisticated understanding, and also it's an assumption of what glorification means. Glorification in this manner, it's not human glory. It's not how human beings understand glorification, right? To glorify somebody means to raise them in your esteem, right? But the universe's existence as a glorification of God simply means that it evidences his power to create. It is an evidence of his power to create. It is a demonstration of his power to create. Intrinsically, that's what it is. And so that means the purpose of all things made by God is an evidence of him as the creator. And therefore there could be no other purpose behind it, no other intent behind it. I know some people might say simply, are you saying that God made us because he can? That would be a deceptively simple way of saying it, because when we understand that as a human being arrogant to do so, right? I made it because I could, right? No. He made us because he did, right? He made us because he did. And you can't there is no first cause behind the first cause. What I mean by that is there is no motivation built on an instinctual drive that made God want to satisfy it by making us. He made us because he simply chose to make us. And you can't, he's not a finite creature that you could deduce anything. And rationality tells us it can only ever be that way. It could only ever be that way. You can't fathom. It's only that he made us as a demonstration of his ability to create, not for a demonstration of his ability to create. If that makes it, if you can understand the subtle distinction between those things. Someone says this is very important to clarify, as it is asked by many. I'll make the universe to share the benefits of existing to those who merit to worship and submit to him. Okay, so before I go into that, that will conclude stage 2 of our investigation of observable reality. The next stages are going to be much shorter, because these are the bigger humps that we have to travel over. But I'll be demonstrating briefly how everything that exists, human life phenomena and everything that we can see, how that too has intention and purpose, and how there is only one revelation that explains all this without contradiction. And we're going to find out what that revelation is. Of course, well, I mean, no price for guessing, of course, what it is. I'm not going to suddenly come out and say it's Jainism, right? But I want us to go from a basis of no assumption to building our concepts based on rational foundation. So we'll break for
Just give me, yeah. So
Isha.
everyone. So right now it is 9:24, and inshallah, we want everyone. We're gonna come back at exactly 9:36. And the thing is, guys, if you know somebody that left and somebody that has any questions, this is the time to tell them to come back. I know a lot of people are thinking about the Lakers and Heat, but you already know LeBron wants it, so you don't have to worry about that, inshallah. But anyways, so we're gonna break for Isha, and we're gonna be back at 9:35, inshallah. So we hope to see everyone back, inshallah, in 10 minutes. And for all those on Zoom, you can stay. And for the questions, we'll start right after the intermission. Jazakumullah khair, and we'll be back right, inshallah, shortly. All right, Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum. Everyone, I'd like to welcome everyone back. Inshallah, we're going to go ahead and start the Q&A session. Brother Abdullah, are you ready, inshallah?
Yes, inshallah.
So I wanted to start off with what the questions that were submitted, and then inshallah, once if we have time afterwards, people can ask questions. I know people are putting questions in the chat, but some people submitted questions earlier. So we're going to try to go through those first. I want to start off with one of the, I think, simpler questions.
Is it possible, brother? I wanted just like, I suppose 10 to 15 minutes just to conclude the final stages of our investigation, which I will be summarizing, but inshallah, then we can get to those questions just to kind of lay the scene for those questions as to, okay, well, now why Islam specifically? So, before the Q&A, is that okay?
Yeah, it is okay. And we'll go from there, inshallah. So we'll spend the first 10 minutes, inshallah, going over, and then we'll go to the Q&A, of course, inshallah.
Okay, Jazakallah khairan, brother.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, because I don't want to leave everyone hanging on this, okay, you know, there's one God, created us with an intention and purpose. Now what, right? So now what's going on? Well, at this point, people's interests, if we have started from a position of not knowing anything at all to reaching this point, would be quite fascinating to know, okay, well, what is now the purpose of life, the point of this lecture? How do we know it? And what can we conclude from it? So again, if we look at what we are observing in the universe. Now, remember, I never assumed that what we were observing was 100% an accurate model of what exists in a material world, because in case you get those ultra skeptics that would say, well, you know, how would you know what you're seeing is exactly accurate anyway, or what your model of the world is correct, for want of a better way of putting it. But whatever the model of the world is, notice I haven't mentioned anything from observation in our accounts of physics to support anything, any conclusion as of yet, because whatever we observe, these things we're always going to reach this conclusion. We're always going to reach this conclusion for definite. I do find it interesting that in the Quran it says that Allah made the universe bil haqq, right? So in truth, almost it's a reassurance that we are not observing something that's false, right? It's not like some false simulation that doesn't have any real reality. It's quite interesting, but we're not going to assume the Quran is true just yet in our investigations. We're gonna continue to see what else we can deduce. So what we observe from what we see is obviously fascinating. We see that there's inanimate objects, things that are not living. So, and what do these things do? Well, they generally they change and they move and they form composite structures and make macro structures. What we know, obviously, subatomic particles form atoms form molecules form what we can see on our level of observation, which is substances, and of course we see energy, radiation, and we see the fundamental forces that are observed. In a way, whatever those things are, we are observing change, and also we're observing there are things which are finite. What's quite fascinating is that the creator of the universe can make things which are, you think, well, he's infinite, unlimited, and yet he can make things which are not him, which are opposite of him, different from him, which change, which they are subject to change in themselves. They are limited in what they are, and he can make them. Right? He can make that which is not himself. I mean, sure, you could say, well, as you know, if you're going to, let's say, be a wood carver and you're going to carve something out of wood, you're carving something that's not, you're not made of wood, so you're making something. Well, firstly, you're not making wood from nothing, but let's follow the metaphor of this. You're actually making something, you're carving something, you're shaping something that's basically made out of matter like you are, and fundamentally the same kind of subatomic particles. Remember, all elements, they might be different, but they're still made out of electrons and at some point, protons. Some might have neutrons, some don't, but at least a proton, right? So these things, and then quarks and leptons and so on and so forth. Anyway, so ultimately speaking, everything in life is changing, and it is, or not in life, but everything in the universe is changing and is limited. And its very existence, just its existence, is a demonstration of the creator's ability to create. Right. So that's the first thing. That must be then the fundamental reason that all things share. We're made of this inanimate matter. We're made of obviously the same lifeless substance, right? But there is now a difference. We're not the same exact kind of thing. Let's look at the next circle, which is just life, or animate matter, right? Life that is different from non-living matter because it proactively self-preserves and it replicates its form, right? It replicates its form. That's what makes life different from inanimate matter. And this is quite fascinating because now the creator is demonstrating the ability to create multiple things of different natures now, right? So not something that's just inert and waits to be, pushed like a billiard ball or a snooker ball we have in the UK. And it just waits there and then until it gets hit and then it moves, right? We have something now that has these processes that actively or proactively tries to preserve itself. A plant will grow towards where there's more light, get its leaves to grow towards more light. Animals will seek out sustenance and food. It will be proactive and it will replicate itself, right? So it will recreate its own form, something that inanimate matter doesn't do, right? So this is quite fascinating because, again, God can not only create matter, but now can create things that proactively self-preserve and replicate. This would indicate that life has now a special subset purpose. In essence, everything's purpose is to be what it is in its most fundamental way, which is a demonstration of the creator's ability to create. However, life does this by it being what it is by proactively self-preserving itself and replicating itself, demonstrating that God can make such a thing. And therefore, by doing that, this specific difference it has from normal matter or inanimate matter, non-living matter, this additional thing is an additional demonstration of God's power. Now God can make something like this that proactively replicates, not just an inert, unliving piece of matter. Now, something else that we notice is it has consciousness, right? Consciousness. And consciousness is quite fascinating, mainly because there is no naturalistic way to explain it. I know that the atheists would say, well, there's no way to explain it yet. However, let's actually think through and understand that it will be impossible to explain. This is formally called the hard problem of consciousness. I'm just going to put that down in the comments section. Oops, I keep sending it privately to the organizers. So here's it is on everyone. So it's called the hard problem of consciousness. They can't explain why. Where does something see itself within matter, within substance or energy? Where is this? What is doing the observing? Right? Where is this observer residing or existing? Right? Well, what's going on? If something is okay, your sensory organs are reporting information back to the brain. You have obviously a physical brain, but what's observing you doing the thinking? What's observing the receiving of these signals? If you have a camera attached to a computer, sure, the camera will receive external stimuli and send it to the computer to process according to its program. Fine, but there's nothing observing within the computer, nothing experiencing that electrical signal, nothing experiencing the processor process that signal. We have it, and we can only assume that animals have it too, only because they seem to react similar to us, and so on. Now, a plant, it might react to certain stimuli, it might react against certain predators by releasing chemicals against aphids and so on and so forth. But when it gets eaten by an aphid, it doesn't experience anything other than stimuli of possible obviously predator, but it doesn't feel it on an experiential level. Whereas when we feel something which we are conditioned to proactively to avoid or to try to escape from, that experience we call suffering or pain, right? And when we are that motivational force as life, the motivational force within life that plants would experience but not would have but not experience, we have that experience when to that drives us to seek something, and when we get that, we are rewarded with pleasure, right? It's what we call pleasure. Whereas a plant doesn't seem to get pleasure from receiving sunlight and obviously absorbing nutrition from the soil. But we have something additional, and we can only assume that animals have the same. There's no reason not to assume so, but it's not important, obviously, if you want to be skeptical and believe that animals are just robots. Some people did believe that in the past, like robots, let's just say, right? But we know, or at the very least, if you want to be ultra skeptic, I know which they might say, well, how do you know any other human being exists or even has a conscience? Maybe it's just you, possibly so, but you at the very least, you have a conscience, and that's all you need to show. That's all you need to be able to prove consciousness exists in the universe. Anyway, so consciousness, the ability to observe and experience the creation of the entire universe. Now, if the entire universe is a demonstration of the creator's power to create, then consciousness is a demonstration of the power of the creator to create something that can witness its own creation, and ultimately, and at the very minimum, that's what consciousness is. Now, humans are an additional. We have one up on animals, which is we have a distinct ability of metacognition, otherwise known as thinking, for short. We have the ability to construct mental models, such as being able to deduce God's existence by observing his effect. Right? We can deduce things that we don't actually see or observe, whereas an animal usually learns it only by experience. Like if an animal sees someone take out a gun and doesn't know what it is, and then hears a loud bang and its friend gets shot, if it's a rabbit or something, then it will know that the next time it sees someone take out something that looks like a human, that looks like a boomstick, as they call it, right? It would instinctually connect that bad things happen when it sees something, this boomy stick, and will then run off, right? So it makes that connection. But us, we can actually deduce things before we detect them. If you want to use a more elaborate example, the Higgs boson was deduced by mathematical prediction before it was detected. Likewise, black holes as well were deduced before they were detected, and so on and so forth, and many gravitational bodies. That's just high-level examples, of course, but you would know that if you hear a noise from outside your house, let's say you hear a noise of a gunshot noise, you would be able to deduce without needing to observe exactly what was happening. Not 100% certain. It could be someone playing a gunshot on a movie, or very loud on their television. But I'm just saying that you can deduce that there's basically something like a gunshot being done, so occurring somewhere, whether it's on TV, fictional, or scarily in real life. So you're able to construct mental models and make deductions or inductions based on those models, as well as abductions, right, which is producing explanations for observable phenomena, which is also the third form of logic you probably haven't heard of. I will type it in, Google it. Abduction, not to be confused with taking people against their will, right? So please don't make that mistake. Anyway, so yeah, and please don't repeat on Twitter. Abdullah's teaching us about abduction. Anyway, so what can we deduce? Well, we can deduce that we are experiencing, the creator intended us to experience the universe to bear witness, because that what is consciousness is. It's witnessing, to bear witness to the universe and the demonstration of his power. So then we can now make a deduction without any scripture that our purpose is to bear witness to the Creator's power. Or in a more simple language, which you've been told in seminaries, of course, to glorify or worship God. But that doesn't convey, well, I mean, it conveys the same concept, but you might understand it in a different way. Whereas it's what's really going on here is that we're just basically we're bearing witness to God's power, and He intended us to be able to do that by giving us this ability. But there is now one other thing. Now there's something else going on, which is we have free will. Or at least we have this experience of the ability to choose, right? We at least have this experience. Now, I know it's disputed amongst certain materialists, and we can get to that. And there's not enough time for me to demonstrate how the arguments against free will are actually fall down. Even the so-called empirical research, I'd say the empirical research vindicates the Islamic view. But if you want to know more about that, you have to go on the course, because it's detailed, and you'll need to be in a more academic or setting. Even it doesn't matter what if you're in, was it secondary school, or was it high school, or college, or university. You need to be able to. You have to sit down and see the evidence for yourself. Because I don't want you just to take something I say, obviously, without question, right? So, but there's not enough time. So just take it from me. There's no evidence to show that humans don't have free will, but we have the experience of choice. We have a perception that we have the ability to make a choice. So that we can only conclude that the Creator intends us to have this perception of choice at the very least. If you want to be ultra skeptic about it, the Creator intended us to have the perception of choice. What does that mean then, right? Also, that we are quite sophisticated creatures. All the creatures seem to know how to live and survive and do what they need to do, from ants to monkeys. But human beings, how are we meant to live? What are we meant to do? I mean, sure, survive and reproduce and so on, but we have the capacity for so much more interaction beyond just survival and reproduction. And we also have some kind of instinct or drive in us to want to connect with, well, when I say connect, but to do something as part of a greater picture, right? For want of a better way. Some people call it the sanctification instinct, a spiritual instinct. Even atheists would have it, where they would, for them, it's just the universe, or being part of this, investigating the cosmos. In a way, that's their God. But everyone seems to need to have a God of some kind, a greater story beyond themselves, that they are just a part of that story. So the desire to be part of a narrative is a more fundamental thing. Other creatures don't seem to have that we can observe anyway. So all these characteristics show that that the fact that they are present in us means that it is required. So, but also, lastly, if consciousness can't arise from material, from the matter, from substance, it would. I can't get into this now because there's limited time. But any attempt to demonstrate it in reality produces an infinite regress fallacy. Like, what's observing you see behind your eye? If it's someone else, what's observing in that person? What's inside, and then what's inside that person? What's inside that person? What's inside that person? It's called a homunculus fallacy. Homunculus fallacy, which is an infinite regress of observers, right? Which atom is doing the observing? Which quantum particle is doing the observing? What is the observer? Where is this observer located, right? So someone asked a question: how do you know there's an afterlife? Well, in every culture, there's been a belief of an afterlife, by the way, and a type of heaven and hell from cultures that don't seem to have had much connection to each other, from ancient Chinese culture, ancient Egyptians, Aztecs, obviously to ancient Greeks. Fun facts for everybody: for anyone who thinks that ancient Greeks, how comes they didn't believe in one God? The God of Moses. And the kingdom of the ancient kingdom of Israel, being based in the land of Canaan, was in about 1200 BC. Homer and Hesiod, writing the first kind of, you could say, Greek poems that starts to summarize the Greek religion, occurs around 700 BC. So basically, the ancient kingdom of Israel is older than Greek religion, or than the official canonization of Greek religion, ancient Greek religion, at the very least, arguably about 500 years before before ancient Greek. So Judaism came first, right, before before the ancient Greeks. Just so you know. Anyway, where was that? Yes. So if matter can't, but a more let's say common sense argument is, if matter can't produce consciousness, then what's producing it? Yeah, it might reside in the mind, but if matter can't produce consciousness, then consciousness must pre-exist a human brain. And likewise, if matter can't produce consciousness, it can't maintain consciousness either, which means that when the brain dies, when you die, your consciousness will simply continue without the brain. And whatever you want to call that, that would have to be the afterlife. Right? I'm simplifying it, of course, because there might be an atheist here saying, I want to hear you talk about some data from scientific experiments and discussions, and I want to say, like, that's in the course, right? But suffice to say, there's no explanation for it. It's called the hard problem of consciousness. There's no explanation for it, and rationally speaking, there can never be an explanation for it. Someone said, but where would the consciousness be after that? That would be a question that we're going to now kind of attempt to answer. So what we know is, we can see we've now kind of produced all this evidence now. We've seen all these observations now, made all these observations. We know that humans are very complex. We have the ability to make models. We have a desire to be part of a narrative. Where's the narrative going to come from? Because you can't deduce more than that. You can't go beyond that. The creator of the entire universe, on this tiny speck, this ball of dust, willed that we would exist with all these faculties, to gaining knowledge and also the ability to speak and have language. Again, where did language come from, right? Because it's not spontaneously generated by human beings, right? I mean, anyone who studies psychology here, you probably know of kids raised in the wild. No one teaches them language. They don't develop it themselves. And if they don't learn language by the age roughly of 15 years old, they can never be taught it. Even if they are discovered by other human beings, they can't learn it. They just remain feral, like animals. So where does language come from? That's an interesting question too, right? Where's that? Which is the ability it helps us categorize information that produces thought, right? So what's going on there? What we can deduce is that if the creator gave us all these things by intent, then there would have to be, if he gave us hardware, right, that can process programs, then he would have had to have created software. Otherwise, the creator would be contradicting himself to make us with this stuff, but then not make software that it seems designed to. And you can deduce that there has to be software, there has to be information conveyed to us. But how is it conveyed? Because it's not internal in our genetics. We're not born with inspiration of this. And so then it can only ever come from some kind of message or messenger. And of course, then if we have free will, presumably whatever message we're given, we have a choice over that message, right? We have a choice to follow that message or not follow that message, because we have the ability to make free will. And that seems to be a reasonable expectation to obviously to expect, in essence, right? From anything we see. So now we have to look, okay, well, what would be the best way of send this message to us? Would it be that God would send some kind of inspiration to us in our head? If that's the case, then obviously we wouldn't be able to have free will, because if everyone is programmed to follow a particular a set of laws for human nature, then you wouldn't, and it was programmed into you, you wouldn't have any free will on the matter. You'd just be robots doing that stuff. And what's the point of giving you free will, but then kind of taking it away from you? Would God appear to us and tell us what he wants from us? Well, if he was to do so, then again, we wouldn't have any free will, right? It would contradict giving us free will in the first place. The only way we could ever, it would be meaningful and it would be consistent with what the faculties is giving us, is if it was sent via message, at least to one person or group of people, and then conveyed to us via those people, right? Could it be angels? Could he maybe send us message via, let's say angels, let's say creatures which are not human but are intermediaries, right? Well, possibly so, but we would have to learn how to live by that way of life. And if they are not like us, it would be hard to follow them by example, because it's like it's easy for you as an angel to tell us that you don't, about sexual desires when, and controlling them when you don't have them, right? Like what do we do? How do we do it? Like, how do we live? We need to learn. Someone we can apprentice from would be the most optimal method. Okay, so now we've made all these deductions. We now have to look at what's the available candidates out there of anyone of making claims of receiving communication from this creator. If we remove everything that contradicts what we've deduced, so remove polytheism, remove deism, remove obviously atheism, obviously, and any other religion where the creator is anthropomorphized as a human being or a creature, we remove that from the equation. What we're reasonably left with is Judaism and Islam. Christianity kind of went wayward when they started to worship Jesus, so or you could say Unitarian Christianity. But then the problem with Judaism and Unitarian Christianity is that we're not really sure, and we have evidence to believe that the message or what we've been conveyed from them is not entirely accurate. We don't have firm knowledge. We know that Christianity has been indeed corrupted by pagan customs, by historical evidence. Again, that's something we can go into in depth and detail. Judaism would be the only candidate left. However, there remains in Judaism some problems in the contradictions in the text, which would suggest that the text has been somewhat tampered with and might not be an authoritative communication. So, and it seems very parochial. It's for the tribes of Israel and not for all mankind. Yes, they do believe in something called the Noahide laws, but they're very simplified. And surely human nature needs a sophisticated system to manage and organize it. Now, that was the process that I took that was the thinking process I took at about 14 years old, from 10 to 14 years old. That made me arrive at Islam by process of elimination. But after further thinking about it for many, many years, I realized that the Islamic explanation accounts for all these things. That everything, that Islam is the only way of life that explains all this phenomena that we have deduced rationally. Speaks about an afterlife, speaks about accountability, speaks about consequences, about punishment and reward for worshipping, for fulfilling your purpose. I'm gonna answer a question that was raised. Actually, there was about 4 or 5 questions related to heaven and hell, and so this, in essence, this is a Q&A we're going to go into. But people ask, why is heaven and hell involving pain and pleasure? What's going on? Well, as conscious creatures, when you fulfill your kind of drives as it was intended you do, you get rewarded with pleasure. And when you are frustrated, your drives are frustrated, your instinctual drives are frustrated, either by imminent threat or by inability to get what you want, you feel pain or suffering. So if we have pleasure and pain in this life, rewarding us for our purpose and not fulfilling our purpose, or one of the levels of our purpose, why not in the afterlife? Why was that a big jump? Why? Of course, we should expect then that accountability for our actions based on free will would involve the exact same mechanisms that we have in this life, in this conscious experience that we're experiencing now. Pain and pleasure would be the same thing. Some would say, what about why would you have someone being punished with fire or pain? And so fire is actually one of the optimal ways to induce pain. In essence, it's the destruction of our nerves and everything like this. It's pain in its purest form, and likewise in many belief systems, there's a paradise where the rewards would be essential, and also something more fulfilling inside us, a deep, you call it spiritual fulfillment, but I don't want to use words which can't be precisely defined without having time to define them. But anyway, so heaven and hell and afterlife would be exactly what I would expect from a revelation, a claim of a revelation. In fact, I'd be quite confused if there wasn't that in a claim to a revelation. We have someone asked, why did God create Iblis or Shaitan, knowing that he would that this person would go against God and rebel and be evil, so to speak, or evil meaning going against the will of God, right? Well, I mean, here's the thing, right? Which is, firstly, free will doesn't mean anything if people actually can't choose to do the opposite. Now, what do I mean by mean anything, right? Well, here's the interesting question, which is, I think that free will is one of the greatest glorifications of God. Great, as in its very existence. Why is that? Well, you have this infinite entity or being that controls everything. And you say, well, if it has such infinite power, can it create something that can go against it, its will? But it controls everything. How is it even possible, right? But here's the thing, is that God's power is unlimited, and his knowledge is unlimited, that he can create things, know what they would do if they had true free will, and bring their decisions into existence, knowing that this is what they would do if they were separate, independent things from himself. And so how can something make some so subhanAllah, if you think about it, this is really, I always find this like amazing, is you have this infinite being that nothing is independent of, and yet it is able to make something act in some small way, almost like it is independent of him, as in to make a choice to go against him or rebel or say no or disregard him, right? So free will itself is one of the greatest creations of God. It is a demonstration of his power to do something which is almost would seem like it was contradictory, but it's not, because at the same time he controls the decisions made by the thing, and he actually brings about that decision by his permission, right? He brings it about, because you depend on God to basically make your decisions and to bring about those decisions, but they're still your decisions, because God's knowledge is not limited to what he chooses, but he would know that if there was something that could choose independent of him, what it would do, and he would bring it about. God has the ability to countenance hypotheticals, meaning he has the ability or knowledge to know hypotheticals, even things that he hasn't made. Evidence of this this is consistent rather with what we see in the Quran, where we see that in the Quran it says that if there was not a God, you would have seen the universe basically in this kind of chaos, as each God takes away from the creation what they made and so on. So if you see this jostle, so in the author of the Quran, whoever it is, seems to understand that God knows hypotheticals and can understand on things which are impossible to exist, and yet he would know exactly what would happen if they did exist, because his knowledge isn't limited to only what he makes, right? Or only that which he controls by direct puppets, right? So free will is an amazing glorification of God, and that's why we could say, someone asked what was the value of life. I say, well, the value of it is really just the demonstration of the ability of the creator to create and to do things which but he could do things which were far beyond just making mindless, inanimate matter, but he makes consciousness. He makes things that can actually realize they exist and realize he exists, and also make things that do that and be able to say no to him. Right now, and then lastly, to finish up before I open up for more general questions, someone said about why would God punish people for making decisions against that reject him, and why is it that we are so fallible, and why are we going to get punished for our fallibility? Like, that's not fair, isn't it? Surely not, right? So it's not fair. Well, here's the thing. The elegance of Islam is or at least we're examining as a revelation. It's balance on this matter. First and foremost, if you fulfill your purpose, you get rewarded, right? Because you're driven to do that. You're created with that drive. You get reward. You seek reward. Fulfilling your purpose, you get frustration or pain if you don't. The afterlife is just the same. If you chose to reject God, reject your purpose, and your rejection was, you made it intrinsic to yourself. You made it that you are going to make your own desires your God, and that involves a comprehensive rejection of God. Then in the afterlife, your rejection of God will, or God's rejection of you, and rejection of you getting your fulfillment will also be comprehensive in a commensurate manner. Likewise, also people say, well, we're so fallible. What's going on? Do you not wonder why? And I expect to see this when I encountered Islam, was almost every surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the author of this Quran, is reminding us how merciful He is. He understands us making sin. In a Hadith Qudsi, even expects us to. And despite the fact that we are diverted from fulfilling our purpose on occasions, that we always come back to Him, that we don't get swayed. What's better, right? So someone who basically is, swimming around on a beach, on a clear ocean with no current, or someone where the current is trying to take them out to sea, but they keep wanting to swim back to shore, to safety, right? They have to exert effort. There's more effort being exerted. Someone trying to stay next to shore, whereas someone who is next to shore but are not being dragged out in the first place. Us choosing to worship God, or rather us choosing to bear witness to His power to create and and affirming Him as the creator, is itself an affirmation of His power. Right? The fact that there are things that could choose to do otherwise than what He wills, and yet they will to fulfill the purpose that He has intended for them. Right? And at the same time, but for that to have any meaning, we have to be given powerful incentives not to choose to fulfill that purpose. We are creatures of the material world, and we will be subject to material causality, right? Temptation, right? Sometimes the material causality is good. Sometimes it's bad. It's like an ocean, right? Interestingly, the Arabic word qalb, meaning the heart, comes from the same root to mean like an ocean that just shifts and changes, right? You're part of this causality, and yet despite this seemingly chaotic causality, you order yourself, or you try to, as much as you can, swim against that causality and go back to the highest causality, the highest cause, right? The origin of everything, the creator. And so this is the value in life. And now the thing is this: there are so many different angles and so many different, obviously, points and evidence. But I came to the conclusion after detailed examination, which hence this 10-week course I have to do, because I can't really iterate it to you here. But Islam was the only possible explanation for reality. The Prophet Muhammad, some people, who worship people, or look up to heroes who were ascetics and never got involved in the material world, or those who were maybe great conquerors, but maybe not even involved in spirituality. You have these extreme characters that people like to look up to in history. But the Prophet Muhammad was very interesting as a character, because he was a balance of everything, and in that he showed us that you don't have to go into live your entire life in a cave as a hermit, right? And that's how you get to God, or live your entire life in one extreme or the other, but to be a balanced human being, that you live in this world that you were created to live in, to trade, to have neighbors or converse with them, to obviously help out family and all these things. The Prophet Muhammad exactly what you'd expect as a role model to demonstrate for us to apprentice ourselves to learn how to actually live by our natural law. Islam said that Islam says that Islam isn't the first revelation that comes from God. It's one of many revelations from God. The commonality in religious ideas throughout history bears testimony to that between different religions that never really contacted each other. The fact, heaven and hell, the idea of one God, and then it becomes corrupted into multiple gods. All these things we see bears exactly the same to the explanation that Islam has provided of human reality. So anyway, I'm going to roughly end it there, but I'm conscious that I haven't been able to go through every single fine detail to show you with the actual evidence from the different civilizations, from history, and from many other aspects of Islam. But here's the interesting thing about the Quran. It expects you to recognize its message, right? In Surah 75, so verse 36, Surah 75, verse 36, it says, does man think that he is to be left aimless? So do you think that we were created for a joke? When clearly we were made by intention, so would be an intention behind us. And intention is a definition of purpose. That there is a greater intent behind us is the definition of purpose. What is good and bad? Good and bad is if you fulfill your purpose and you don't. You have a car. A good car is a car that fulfills its purpose. A good car to you, that is, right? That has an engine, has wheels, it works. It gets you from A to B, right? That's its purpose. It's a good car if it can do that. If the car has no engine and no wheels, it's a bad car. Why is that? Because it's not fulfilling its purpose. Good and bad could only ever be understood based on our purpose, right? And the very fact that we have, psychologists haven't obviously observed this, but anyone from any part of the world, any time in history would have known this, that we have a desire in ourselves to want to be part of a narrative or a higher story than ourselves. It's inbuilt in us. Why would the creator of the universe make it inbuilt in us? And lastly, also, scientists will say, oh, the universe is so great and vast. Many of the parts of the universe will never observe everything in the universe, or directly. What's the point? Why does God make everything in the universe if we as human beings won't be able to visit it, right? Again, I say that's an assumption. You assume the universe was made for you, right? It wasn't made for you, right? The Quran says that the creations of the heaven and the earth is greater than the creations of man, but verily man knows not, and we don't know this, right? And we don't even fathom how great the universe is, and that's exactly true. We don't. And so this is really the case. The God in the Quran is one that doesn't have finite features, is not a creature, does not subject to tiredness, has sent messengers to mankind, is merciful, always willing to forgive, knowing that we were made as creatures which, as the Quran says, incline towards the earth, but man inclines towards it. We are creatures which are heavily influenced by material causality. And yet, all that is needed to redeem ourselves is that we never give up trying to swim against that current when the causality goes in the wrong way, to get close, remain close to the shore of the creator, so to speak, and of the material purpose, the natural laws that he has ordained for us to follow, and have the ability to conceptualize in our mind as ideas, as laws, and as a belief system. So in essence, Islam is the only explanation that explains all these things without contradiction. And what does the Quran say? That had it been from anything other than Allah, or the creator, God, of course, you would have found in it many contradiction. And I've often said it's not just contradiction within the source of the Quran, but also with reality, what you observe in the natural world. And every other religion that talks about whether it says the purpose of us is to get enlightenment by spending 80 years or 60 years meditating and depriving our bodies and things like that. Well, that doesn't make sense, because why should it take most of your life just to discover what your purpose in life is? And why did you have to deprive your body of sustenance when it needs to eat sustenance in order to get enlightenment? And what is enlightenment? Is to understand the purpose of life. So the purpose of life is to understand the purpose of life seems kind of circular. Or reincarnation. You're meant to be learning a lesson in all your previous lives, but you can't remember anything from your past life. That doesn't make sense. It's contradictory. Types of belief system where they believe that there's something called karma in the universe. Actions are either good karma or bad karma. Well, who's measuring that, right? Who's making the measure, and what's the point of that? Or some Hindu interpretations of our purpose of life, where, well, God made us just for sport, and we were once part of God, but now we are separate from God, and we have to get back to God. Well, firstly, if we're part of God, why aren't we infinite? Secondly, how can God be made into parts when he's fundamental? Like, he's not made of their substance anyway. And how can anything that was a part of God be ignorant in the first place? And how can God change anyway? It produces contradictions. Any other concept or idea that is different from Islam produces contradictions. And that's why but I have to demonstrate all the other possibilities quite systematically, which is why I'll have that course that will be done by the Quran Institute. Inshallah, I recommend all of you to go on it, but I can't show it here today. So I'll just make an assertion, which is that Islam, I came to the conclusion that Islam is not only the best hypothesis to explain reality, which is what initially made me convert to Islam, but also the only possible explanation for reality. And please go back to the Quran and read it in light of what you've heard today. See how the author of this Quran seems to expect you to recognize it. That you should be recognizing this, right? And I'll finish up with a very interesting kind of there was a very interesting ayat in this Quran. I want you to read it, right? Which is in Surah 67, verse 10, ayat 10. The people who are going into Jahannam, into hell, are saying, if only we had been listening or reasoning, we would not be in the companions of the fire, right? We would not be punished so. In essence, if only they had used their faculties that God had given them, they would have avoided this punishment. But they chose not to, because they chose to swerve towards the earth. They became slaves to causality and not slaves to the cause. So, barakallahu feekum from listening. Thank you for your patience. And inshallah, I look forward to your questions and comments. I'm going to stay on here to answer as many questions as possible for as long as the organizers allow it. So I'm not going to go anywhere. And ideally, I want to get through all your questions, every single one. So inshallah, barakallahu feek for your patience, and I'll pass it to the host, Brother Hassan.
So first I'd like to appreciate everyone. I know we started around 7:50, so mashallah, mashallah for everyone, may Allah accept from everyone. I know some people sent some questions online, but we had 45 questions that were sent in previously, and I know you covered some of those questions. So if you feel like you already covered it, we can just skip it and go to the next one, and then if we have time, we'll go to the ones in the chat, inshallah. So the first one, it's kind of a simplistic question. We can start off with this one, inshallah. Kind of just change the mode, is that somebody asked, how can they increase their taqwa?
Okay, so increase your taqwa, you first have to understand what that means. Your taqwa, sometimes translated as God consciousness or the fear of God, is really just the acknowledgement and making it present in your mind, the realization that in essence, you have this creator which you completely and totally depend on, and can do whatever he wills to you and decide whatever he wills for you, and that there is nothing else that you should be concerned about pleasing or serving or worshiping. Then this creator that knows everything you do, and every action you do won't go to waste, and every action you do is something that he will know, because he's the very one that's maintaining you doing that action and permitting you doing the action, giving you literally the permission to do that very specific action that you're doing. So once you know this, keeping it present in your mind is taqwa. I like to liken it to, there are people, many of you might be university students, right? So you might know that there's a difference between someone being told that they have exams in a couple months' time, and then when the reality is very clear to them, not very clear to them, rather, it becomes a present thought in their mind that, oh, wait a second, the exams are like next week. I have to start revising. I should stop, I don't know, wasting my time, right? So that realization, that's not realization, but that emotional agitation is taqwa. And it helps you to be motivated, right? That's what taqwa does. It helps you to be motivated, and it can go up and down like any other motivation, but generally, if you keep yourself regularly motivated by remember, there's many ways you can remember God or contemplate. From contemplation, one Sahabi used to jump into a hole and imagine that he was dead. And he imagined how regretful he would be that he didn't have any ability to make further actions. And so, and then he would realize that he wasn't dead and he could actually change his life and do good things. And so, and that he would do that. So that would be about psychological tactics to help keep you motivated. And inshallah, there are many much more accomplished motivators than myself. I'm someone who likes to, I focus on more aqliya matters, of course, because that's where currently a lot of Muslims are having trouble with, and matters to do with the intellect and understanding Islam on an intellectual basis. But of course, your conceptualizing and internalizing of that into your subconscious, otherwise known as the nafs or the qalb, that one obviously is a point for discussion another time anyway.
All right, definitely. What is your reply that to the West is more developed because they apply Islamic values more than Muslim countries?
So the cause of decline of the Muslim civilization was because, generally speaking, in roughly, I'd say, the 15th to 16th centuries, maybe even the 17th centuries, one of the worst things that could ever happen to a civilization happened to us for a prolonged period, and that was success. So we became very wealthy, successful, and then eventually what's it called, extravagant and decadent and lazy. And success is the killer, is the killer of the mind and the killer of innovation and drive and proactiveness. Not to generalize, but have you seen that? Comfort also kills the mind, so to speak, right? So people don't tend to think much if their food is given to them and on a plate, and they don't need to think about how to get it, right? For example, to use a crude example, right? Often people have said that, maybe in America you've seen this, but certain celebrity kids, so kids of celebrities or kids of rich people, tend to be quite unsophisticated in thought because they never had to think much to get their next meal or luxury goods. And so the intellect becomes defunct because you don't need to use it as a tool anymore. You've got what you need, right? You don't need to use it as a tool to survive, develop, improve, because you've got everything you want, and and all you have to do is just be conversant and efficient at begging your parents to, or blackmailing your parents, emotionally blackmailing your parents to get you what you want, right? So it becomes the mind killer. Now, what European observers in the Muslim world observe, they always use this very typical word and very common word, which is they describe the Muslim world as decadent, which is interesting, right? Because now they describe the Muslim world as this austere, right? But it's very decadent, and then it got to the point where you'd see you've probably seen these old paintings, right? There, that the buildings begin to crumble and no one's really caring about maintaining stuff. Right? They're going for a retro look, but their clothes are immaculate and amazing and full of colors and all this kind of stuff. They want to look really fashionable, right? But but when it comes to their buildings, they're going rustic, right? Let's not repair it, let's not develop it, it's authentic. Just joking. But this degradation of our industry began to happen. The West they learned, scientific methods from us and industrialization from us. And they took it. The new world provided lots of gold for them to basically get lots of resources, and they would come to the Muslim world with lots of gold and buy up our resources, and then say, it's okay, we can manufacture for you, and we'll manufacture cheaper for you. And then the Muslims like, okay, well, we control the trade routes, so we get money no matter what. So let's buy cheap, made in the West, right? Buy a nice cheap. Why make our own? Why have our own industry when we can buy from the West? And this is in the 17th century, by the way, right? And then our own industry declined, which some could argue is something happening to America now and China, but that's a different discussion. I have simplified it greatly, but what also happened is Muslim arrogance, hubris, and over time an ossification of Islamic thinking. We would get less and less sophisticated scholars as the level of thinking of Muslim society began to decline due to luxury, I would argue. And then we became more introspective and not out, and we forgot the Islamic world mission was to basically spread the message of Islam to the world, because the point is we have to give mankind its software, right? The software for it, the hardware that God gave it to run the program they were meant to, or to reiterate the program that they have forgotten, got corrupted in their own. We are the reboot, so to speak. And that's what the message of Islam is meant to be conveyed to mankind. We forgot that because we got successful, and we became arrogant, thinking we were superior just by calling ourselves Muslim and nothing else, right? Oh, we're just better, right? And then it justified all kinds of things, just justified take slave raids into Western cities or towns and so on and so forth, taking Westerners as slaves, because they meant to serve us. Wait, that's not the point. You're not meant to be doing that. You're meant to be conveying the message of Islam. You're not meant to just be viewing them as you're better, you're superior, right? That's arrogance, right? So this is what happened with Islamic civilization. And then you had colonialism, because we started to degrade in our material abilities, and therefore the West outperformed us. Around the 1700s is when that shift finally happened, and they outpaced us, and then our education systems just got wiped, and our understanding of the political aspects of Islam became lost, and so on and so forth. There's a large answer, there's a big answer to this question, because it's quite obviously complex. But that being said, though, we started to degrade roughly around around 1,000 years. That was only after 1,000 years of Islam. That's a pretty good track record. It took 1,000 years of Islam before you got that degradation in 1700s, right? I said that's about 1,000 years, right, of Islam. Whereas in the West, they're starting to degrade only after 800 years since their Renaissance, or since the beginning of their Renaissance in the 1200s. So yeah, it's kind of we have 200 years more than they did before we degraded, and inshallah we will revive. So anyway, but stuff like this is part of the revival, getting back to our deen, understanding why we're Muslim, why we're not any other religion, why Islam is the truth. This is the kind of things that we need to do, as well as many other things. But inshallah, I'll leave it there.
Okay. The next question we have here. How does the concept of determinism come in line with choice? Is everything determined? Then why are we punished for our acts? If as it was Allah who made us that way, and His deterministic cause caused our wrong actions.
I would say that everything in the universe is determined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through mechanisms that we don't know, we don't fully understand or know currently. Referring to the quantum world, that's the quantum world is our current frontier of our knowledge and understanding. However, that being said, I would say that our free will isn't fully determined. I would say that most of our decisions are based on calculation, yes, of costs and benefits, pros and cons, and the scientific experiments have shown that. But it is only when we're faced with two very powerful and pressing contradictory desires, like if you let's just say if you're tempted, if you let's say are an alcoholic, right, and but also unfortunately you're an alcoholic, and you know it's wrong because you're Muslim, So what do you do, right? When someone offers you alcohol and it's nice and you're feeling depressed and you want to enjoy it, but you know it's wrong. Your desire for it to get you, because you get pleasure from it, and at the same time your desire against it because you know that it will it is against your purpose and it will be going against your higher narrative, right? As a human being, as a creation of God. Only when there's two conflicting choices, which are both, they can you can go either way on these two, and it's not about cost and benefit, because you know exactly what you'd get from drinking alcohol. You know exactly what you get if you abstain from it. You're not making the judgment between is it one type of lemonade or a different type of lemonade, which one's the better type, which lemonade would get me the best enjoyment, right? Which is probably a question you'd probably get a lot when going through Walmart, because when I went to America, the amount of choice you have there is literally mind-numbing. We have choice here, but come on, guys. How many brands of lemonade do you need? Seriously. Anyway, but that is calculation, right? Which gets me my objective. You already have an objective. How do you get to which one gets you the biggest bang for your buck, as they say, right? Which gets you that objective? Which gets you the most pleasure from these two choices? Whereas when you are faced between let's say a conflict, right? That's the only time you have real free will. That's when your free will can manifest itself. You might know this in Islam as imtihan, right? As being tested. If you're not tested, you can't manifest your free will. Basically, you need to be tested, basically. And that's precisely the point. That's precisely why you need to have tests, why God has to test you. Otherwise, you won't have free will. I want to add something else that I thought about and I didn't get to iterate it, which is there's another assumption, which is we assume that everything in this universe, just because you have the same purpose, doesn't mean that your experience of this universe was going to be exactly the same as something else that has the same purpose. Your purpose is just to bear witness to God's creation and your demonstration of God's power to create. That's your purpose. You can do it on different levels. One could be you could just be born, live a few minutes and then die, and that was it. Your purpose is fulfilled like that, and that was all that God intended for you to fulfill your purpose. You can be given a lifespan of 80 years or 100 years and be tested and make choices and enact your free will. And that was how you were going to fulfill, that was the manner that God intended you to fulfill the purpose of you bearing witness to his creation of this universe and his ability to create. So just because we all have the same overall purpose doesn't mean you have the same specific way of fulfilling that purpose that God has intended you to fulfill it. And so on. That's it. But someone asked, why did God make Shaitan, who would cause evil and so on? No, everyone actually will ultimately serve God. Everyone serves God, right? The case is that those who serve God willingly and those who serve God unwittingly, right? So when God is creating Adam alayhi salam and is making and is bringing prophets amongst human beings who are going to be teaching them their purpose in life. Okay, human beings will not have really, you have these revelation that's teaching people good, teaching people what they're meant to be doing, and avoiding certain bad things and so on and so forth. But here's the thing, though, that would in a way be unfair, because now you're not giving people the ability to even conceive of any information that would be about doing bad things, right? They wouldn't be conceiving of doing bad things, of choosing not to obey God, because all they've ever been given by their culture is how to obey God, and there is no conception they would conceive of or imagine even the idea of disobeying that. So Iblis, who initially was trying to prove a point because he's racist against human beings, is so as a racist against human beings who thinks he's better than us and thinks that we're just people who are disobedient, and he's going to prove it. He's going to demonstrate that we're disobedient, and he's not worth him bowing down to, so to speak, as in not worth him humbling himself to, because he believes he's superior. He's going to show God, although he knows God knows this, but he's going to show that Adam alayhi salam and his progeny are not worth the creation. They're not going to fulfill their purpose. There's no point to making them. Of course, and obviously the angels also, are witnessing this situation. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, or at least in the Quran, and I say that because we need to, obviously, I know that someone's going to say, you haven't demonstrated fully yet by all the different, oh, that's all right. But the Quran is now saying, as an explanation that says God knows what he doesn't know, that in spite of all this temptation, and with all this temptation now that permitted by God for a force that's actively trying to swerve human beings away from God, there's going to be people who reach even greater heights of choosing God over this material, over temptation away from God. What that means is you have material temptation away from God, but now you have this an additional force trying to tempt you away from God. That's not material, all right? It's whispering and giving you ideas, right? In a way, you have revelation that's giving you whispering and giving you ideas, so to speak, to worship God. And so balance is for you to have free will fully manifested. You're going to have temptation whispers for you to go against God, so that you can now make that choice. And in spite with these two forces, there will be people who will excel even greater, because in spite of this, they will worship God and will bear witness to God as the creator, and his ability to create, despite all these temptations to the contrary. So Iblis, whether he likes it or not, is fulfilling God's purpose, even though he might not, although he might rationalize that out to himself, that he's doing that. Yeah, he is just doing he's an agent of God. He's just proving, he's not hating God, but he's proving God, that these people are going to be rejectors of God, and he's going to show that. But at the same time, because God tested him on his arrogance, and he felt, and to reject God to God's face, so to speak, is kufr, right? Is rejection. It is rejection. It's full-on rejection. To say no in the presence of God, so to speak, that's full-on rejection. That he got vengeful. It's like, well, you've made me veer away. You tested me, and you made me veer away from, you made me swerve away from obedience. So I'm going to take them with me. It's revenge. It's vindictiveness, basically. So, which is interesting, because in Christianity, or in Christian conceptions of God and demons and all this kind of stuff, Lucifer, or Satan, quote unquote, just seems to be bad, right? Just like, I'm going to be bad. I'm just going to be evil. All demons are just viewed as just created to be evil. That's their nature, is to be evil. And that wouldn't make any sense. Why would God make something that had no choice other than to be evil? Then they're just doing what God tells them to do, right? Why would they be punished for that, right? So the Islamic concept of Iblis almost seems to be setting the record straight with regards to what really happened, and it makes more psychological sense. And that's just one small tiny thing about Islam that just makes sense and fits in with everything that we can observe. And it's just a small tiny thing. So anyway, I think that answers a few other questions. And that was a question that was also on the poster, I believe, for this event. So I had to make sure it was addressed. Otherwise, someone said, wait a second, what about that question on the poster? So I hope that makes sense. So inshallah, please just continue. What questions are there?
So right now I'm going to let the brother or the sister iPhone D Iman to ask the question Allah. Then I'm going to ask the question from right after that. So the person who requested to speak Allah.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum. I wanted to ask, because we define God as the two main attributes is infinity and will or volition. But for example, if someone comes and tells us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a wajh, has a face, and so to speak, it has to be defined in some way if it's not taking literally. So if we're talking about some metaphor or it's just metaphorically speaking that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a wajh, but not literally speaking. What is the proper Islamic response of this? I know there's many sects like Asha'ira and Maturidi, and that has different interpretations of the attributes of Allah. But according to this, and even for the hand of Allah, if it has to be taken literally, how can we respond to this, Ustad?
Okay. Well, you've probably really noticed from my previous lectures, if anyone who has looked into that. But basically, I limit myself to just being a da'i, right? So I call to generic Islam, right? Not to any particular school of creed, although some people might misunderstand some of my discussions about this. Say, well, Abdullah, you say that there's no eternality to the eternal past or infinite past, but what about Ibn Taymiyyah discussing that God could have an infinite past, or does have or it's not a problem if he does have an infinite past, and he's always creating from his infinite past. Whereas what I say is what I've actually said is that you can't have an infinite past of changing things that themselves are changing, right? So finite things, but God is outside time. According to some narrations, he is time, meaning he's the one who's making the change, and he exists with no beginning, but not subject to being changed, as in he's not changed. He doesn't live in change, if that makes any sense. He doesn't reside in change. God, this is all anthropomorphizing of God. I would say that this doesn't exactly disagree with Ibn Taymiyyah. It's just I'm using different language, and I'm not urging anyone to adopt any particular school of Aqidah between these different the Sha'ira or the Athariya or Al-Hadith or Mu'tazili or others. This is something for scholars to discuss, and for those students of knowledge who are interested to look into what the scholars have said. It's not for me to get involved with advising you to join one or the other, right? I'm only here to call to the generic Islam that we all, on the fundamentals that we all agree on. So I won't advise you on that matter. However, I will explain something just to clarify on the question you asked, which is when describing Allah has a wajh or a yad, and so on and so forth. The Ash'ari will say it's a metaphor, right? The hand of God or the face of God. Just like in the Quran, it says it refers to a traveler as Ibn Sabil, right? Son of the road or the way. It doesn't mean that you have someone whose father or mother was actually a road or a pathway, right? It's not literal, yeah. So the Ash'ari would say that's what it means. It's a metaphor, and they would say, oh, clearly it's a metaphor. And of course, those who are Athari or for Ahl Hadith or however they want to describe themselves as, would say that we affirm that God has these terms. He has these terms as an attribute. So he has a wajh, he has a yad, a face or a hand, if you want to translate it like that. But bila kayf, so we don't say how, we don't say what that means in essence, right? We just because they will say it's just because it says it in the Quran, we don't want to say that's not the case, because we worry that we're saying that God is lying when he says he has a wajh, but he doesn't have a wajh, right? So we want to affirm the word, right? Just for that, but we don't know what it means, or we're not going to say X, Y, and Z. I know there's ikhtilaf on Staw al-Arsh. What does it mean when the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is described as ascending the throne, or there's an ahadith described that on the Day of Judgment, he'll come to people in a shape that people will recognize. An ahad narration, by the way, but still, meaning it's not definite for aqidah, for core aqidah, which all scholars agree on, but it's something that is part of the branches of creed, for the furu of aqidah, branches of aqidah, as in like beliefs you can adopt in essence, and depending on the school of thought, how you'd interpret it. So what does that all mean? Well, generally speaking, again, I'm not here to argue against or call for any particular school of thought, but all I'm saying is that there would be no contradiction, because no one's saying that from eternity past, God has had a shape or form that he basically can't change, or is his essential shape. They just say that on their judgment, you'll basically see a form that he will come in to engage with you. Will it be his actual essence? Well, they don't say that. That's not his essence, right? They'll just say like a burning bush or a light veiled, what have you. They might say it's similar to that, depending on their interpretations of the Quran, like seeing God like a moon, like you see clearly the moon from a hadith. Sorry, it's a lot of it is semantical. It's semantical. No one says that in essence God is bounded, right? And no, at all. There are debates as to location. This is a location here and there, but he's not bounded in anything, right? So he's not bounded in a location, as in by something that encompasses him, that holds him or contains him in essence. So everyone agrees on that, but it's a semantical debate. And for reasons of my policy of non-sectarianism, as in not sectarianism, but my neutrality on this matter, but only as a da'i, because I think it would be unbecoming and perhaps presumptuous of me to adopt a particular school of thought to invite you to, when that's beyond my job limit, quote unquote, right? So I'm only going to present you the generic aspects of Islam to show that everyone agrees on these very basic things. Up to you to research these things yourself, and if you want to adopt positions on any of these schools of thought, then please do so, but do so after reading all different understandings by different scholars and come to your conclusion based on what you think is the most convincing, and obviously also be sincere as much as you can on the matter.
Next question: is it true the Quran was without dots at the time of the Prophet? I know there's for non-Arabic speakers to recite, but how do we know it was recited that way?
So diacritical marks, yes, we're not, well, I mean, there is some historical discussions as to when diacritical marks appeared, but suffice to say, even if there wasn't diacritical marks at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, in the way Arabic was written, it wouldn't make any difference to the preservation of the Quran. The fact that it was preserved by multiple chains of transmission, both oral and textual, and the fact that you don't have the kind of variants like you'd have in the Bible, where you'd have paragraphs that don't exist in one version but do exist in another, whole sentences that don't exist in one version but do exist in another, and so on and so forth. So I said there's nothing to be concerned about generally, but a lot of the kind of diacritical marks, rules, like we have commas in English and full stops or periods, I believe you call it. These things were useful and brought on to obviously aid, and IR separators and so on, so verse separators in the Arabic. These things were used just to aid reading, as reading aids, basically, as Arabic spread beyond those who were, native speakers, proficient in Arabic, to non-Arabs who were learning Arabic, and it wasn't their native language, and so they needed a bit of help to obviously grapple with this language. So we'd only expect that these things would come about, and so on. And now we obviously have harakat, right? So guidance as to how to pronounce and the vowels of consonantal letters in Arabic, right? And now if you don't know Arabic, if you're not conversant with it and you're learning it, those vowelations, those harakat are useful. But Arabic speakers who it's their native language right now don't need harakat. They don't need fatha, kasra, and dhamma, right? They don't need that, or sukun or shadda, so on. And they don't need that. They can read. They recognize the consonantal word, and they will just read it without needing that. But their ancestors didn't even need the diacritical marks, the dots, right? They could recognize it and read it like this. So that's all it is. So you don't have to be too concerned about that.
Next, I'm gonna go to the next question. Can we come to the conclusion of Allah's attributes through rationality? Example, Allah is all truthful, all knowing.
I would say that it depends what attributes you're referring to. So the attributes where the attributes which are, you could say, define what he is in essence, then like that the fact that he has a will, so he chooses, he decides, and I suppose by derivation, the determiner, the shaper, the measurer, I'm a soul word, and all these things, right? You can come to this rationally, yes. As to the wordings or the names of Allah, obviously you can't, because you don't know what Allah has chosen to name himself in any language, of course, but you can come to that concept, the basic concept that he determined all things, yes. But for example, things like the stoning punishment, right? You wouldn't be able to derive that exactly. You need revelation to derive that. So the official names that he wants to call, he wants humans to know him by in any particular language, you need revelation for that. You just can't assume stuff like that. But you can certainly deduce that he would be all powerful, all knowing, and would have a will, as in the ability to choose or to shape or determine things. Yes, I mean, yeah, I mean, in essence, I was trying to think of attributes in the Quran that you probably couldn't derive rationally. Yeah, like the stoning punishment, the oft forgiving. You couldn't determine whether God, how God would deal with sin, or because you need to have revelation to show you what the laws of the natural law of mankind is, and then you'd have from that revelation you'd have to know how Allah would treat breaches of that law. So you need revelation to show you that kind of stuff. You wouldn't be able to do this yourself. So in essence, through pure rationality, you can only get to a conclusion of he's an infinite creator. He's intended us to be a demonstration of his ability to create. Through all our attributes are a demonstration of his ability to make those attributes, and that we have a natural law that we're meant to live by. What is that natural law? You can maybe deduce the criteria of how to what to expect, and a revelation to fulfill. It needs to have a mark of authenticity, otherwise known as a miracle, right? Because you need to have an authentication mark from the author, right? The same author of the universe, right? So you can deduce that. It has to come via messenger. You know it would be optimal if it comes via human messenger, because that's someone you can imitate and emulate. You can deduce all those things, expectations. And then when you encounter the revelation, obviously, if it meets the expectations, great. You can then say, okay, this is what I expect and I can follow it. But the point of revelation is it will tell you stuff that you can't deduce. What is our law? What is the natural law of human beings? What's our natural habitat? What's our natural societal structure? You can't deduce that rationally. The failure of political ideologies to deal with human nature is apt demonstration of that humans can't really encompass. We don't know how to organize human beings in the optimal way, and that's the issue. It's not saying that there's a system that will make humans perfect, because humans can't be perfect because they have to have free will. But what system can organize human instincts and drives and program them with the right software to create the optimal society? Only revelation can provide that.
So before I go on, it's 11 o'clock here in Florida and in the US of A, America. But anyways, I know we have 38 people online on Facebook, but I want to ask everyone: is everyone okay if we were to go for, because we said we're going to finish at 11? Is everyone okay? Let me just get some responses to if we go to 11:30 for another 20-30 minutes. Are you guys up for that? Just let me see if what some people say, inshallah. All right, inshallah. So I'll go ahead to the next question.
Let me just say,
go ahead.
I did promise that if anyone has any questions they want to ask me, or you'd like to challenge me on anything, you don't. I mean, whether you're Muslim or not, I would accept it, because challenges can be useful for everyone else listening. So anything I say you disagree with, or it wasn't fully clear, or you just think I've contradicted myself, or I've begged the question on something, and you want to vocalize it, obviously, so everyone can hear, then please do so. I mean, I'm inviting you to do so. It will help everyone to hear that. But if not, so then I'll just take the questions as was submitted.
Yeah. So that being said, I'll give an opportunity now. Does anyone want to say anything to rebut or go hard at Brother Abdullah Andalusi? Um, anyone, inshallah, give it a couple of seconds. You can unmute yourself or you can type in the chat. So I guess not in the not here, but I can be that person, inshallah, if you want, for a little bit. So one thing that you mentioned, you talked about the afterlife, and you talked about and you also did a whole talk one time about, is hell just? And one of the things that people that bothers a lot of people, it was alluded also in the questions, is the whole concept: why would Allah Subhanahu wa Taala punish humans for eternity if they did sins for a very short amount of time? Why would God, who's all merciful, who created us, and then destined us for punishment, if He already knew that we were going to go to hellfire? So why would God do such a thing? And why would we go burn and burn and burn for eternity? That doesn't make sense.
Okay, khair, inshallah. So basically, like all things, there are assumptions here. And as I said, all that I'm doing is hopefully wiping away the cobwebs of assumptions that leads people to think there are contradictions or problems within Islam, or that cause them to have doubts. You'll always find it's always just at the root cause, there's an assumption somewhere lurking. So, okay, why would God make human beings knowing they would go to hell? That assumes that God is some kind of scientist who doesn't know the outcome of the experiment and needs to experiment in order to know the outcome. I assume if that's the intent behind that question, then obviously, again, that's anthropomorphizing God, that God is somehow a human being that doesn't know stuff and needs to test stuff out. I also mentioned that some of the many causes of polytheism was anthropomorphism, the idea that God is too lofty, that he's like a human, he has a limited attention span. You can't access him directly. He doesn't know what you're doing. You have to go via intercessors, because these intercessors, they will intercede with you and raise your case in attention, or they've been delegated authority or with power, so they can help you out. And whereas God, God is just like, you're too busy, quote unquote. Or they are somehow more merciful than God. Or, I want to go to this particular shrine because whatever sub-deity, stroke saint, stroke local spirit, whatever that's there is like really merciful, nice person, nice guy, and will show mercy on me and will intercede with me in God, because surely God wouldn't have mercy. It's like, well, wait a second, God is the merciful and the most merciful, and yet there you are thinking that he's not. And as one hadith said, that Allah will treat you, to paraphrase, Allah will treat you as you think of him. So if you want to think that he's not merciful, then he will not be merciful to you, because he's told us. It's actually you're almost thinking he's a liar or ignoring him, that to say that there's someone else that can be more merciful than God, in the hereafter, or what have you. Likewise, when people look at suffering in this world and they say, oh, how can God allow suffering in this world? I say, well, if the purpose of this world was only this world, if God created us and we would just suffer forever, so he would make us without us doing anything, he just put us straight into suffering forever, what would be the point of that? It would make no sense. Suffering means, or pain means, that you're frustrated in achieving your purpose. So why would God make us with a purpose that would be frustrated no matter whatever we do, forever? Right? That's our end. That's the end of us. No, that would only be the case if this was this universe was the end in itself. If there is another or subsequent universe or reality, whatever you want to call it, or if you want to use the word universe in its broadest sense, universe just means everything that exists, which means that Jannah and Jahannam would be part of the universe, right? The universe just means everything that exists. So it would just be a different bubble of it, but certainly part of the universe, separated from this part of the universe, but part of it. Anyway, we know there's another reality, or a greater one, or a subsequent one, that is the ultimate end. But here's the thing, which is that if you look at, I wrote an article on this, just so you know. where I looked at, because this is a very big topic, you could say. I called "Is Hell Just?" a response to secular liberals and atheists. There's a reason why I put liberals and atheists, because the liberal concept is that human beings are independent individuals which are sovereign unto themselves. You own yourself. You are your own person. So then God is just some interloper, like some neighbor that bothers you and is doing bad things to you. And oh, why are you doing bad things to me? How dare you involve yourself in my life, right? This is the mentality that goes to leading people to have doubts about God. Like, oh, why is he doing this? Why is he being unjust? And say, well, wait a second. He's maintaining your very existence right now. He's permitting you to speak right now, to think right now, to go on. Every subatomic particle and smaller, almost to paraphrase the verse in the Quran there, is being maintained by God and is known to God, right? So you're not an independent individual. You don't own yourself. If by ownership you mean that you have a right, or that which has a right on you, then God is the only owner of you, basically. There's no other owner of yourself. He's not an interloper. He's who you depend on. And so if you're basically rejecting him, then rejecting your very purpose, then that can only be greeted by what the same thing you'd get in this life if you were to frustrate your purpose in this life too, which is pain or frustration. And the ultimate frustration and pain is Jahannam. And for those people who've chosen, but there are people who they make mistakes and then but they want to go back to worshiping God. They've just veered a little bit off the way. God can greet that with forgiveness if they want to return back. For those who've made God their purpose, but they think that they can get away with maybe not fulfilling that purpose sometimes, taking a small break, and they don't want to seek God's forgiveness, then God can punish them up to a duration of, or in proportion to the significance of the crime that they did, the significance of the crime against their purpose, and then they'll be rewarded afterwards for their general desire to worship God, which they did in all the things. So they're sinners, fallible sinners, unrepentant sinners. But there are those people who have intrinsically chosen to reject God comprehensively. And if they would continue to reject God comprehensively, the reward for them would only have to be, well, then they would be in the afterlife permanently frustrated, as they have permanently rejected God. Now, here's the interesting thing, which is everyone, you might think, well, look, Abdullah, this means that there are people who slip through the net, who won't be worshiping God, who will reject God, and then they will just be rewarded for that by punishment and frustration forever. And what was the point of them? That's a big waste of creation, right? They're just wasting away because they chose to reject God. I mean, there's no how does that glorify God? Well, I mean, it glorifies God in the fact that they were made, their very existence glorifies God. And the fact that, everything that happens to them is by the power of God. So that's always going to glorify God on a fundamental level. But even their rejection of God will be rectified and turned into a glorification of God. Why? Because what you read in the Quran was there'll be people who go into Jahannam, right? Going to hell, and they rejected God, and they will say in hell, and here's what the Quran says about this. So Surah 6, ayah 27 to 28. I'm going to do you a favor and copy and paste it. So I'll read it out. The author of the Quran is saying, if you could but see when they will be held over the fire, they will say, would that we were sent back. Then we would not deny the ayat, the signs of our Lord, and we would be of the believers. No, it has become manifest to them what they had been concealing before. But if they were returned, they would certainly revert to that which they were forbidden, and indeed they are liars. And again, another verse of the Quran, which is Surah 40, ayah 11 to 12. We confess, these are people who are in hell. They'll say, we confess our sins. Then is there any way to get out of it, basically? And they'll be said to them, this is because when Allah alone was invoked, you disbelieved, but when partners were joined to him, you believed. So the judgment is only with Allah, the Most High, the Most Great. Here's the thing. So these people who are put in Jahannam, the only time they will ever recognize God and accept him and want to obey him is when they're being punished. And if they were to be taken out of that, they would reject. They would go back to rejecting. In essence, Jahannam is the only place they would worship God. And I want to give you an example from someone all of you will probably know, right? Someone like this. There's someone who basically does whatever they want, and they will hurt whoever they want, and they're selfish, have no empathy or don't care. The only time they will care about what they did to other people is when they've got caught and they're about to be punished, or they are being punished. And they said, "No, I'm sorry. I know it was wrong. I know it was wrong. I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't do it. I was wrong. I know I'm wrong. I admit it. Sorry. Give me another chance. I won't do it again." And then when you let them go, or you, so to speak, right? Again, not abduction, no abduction here, just logical abduction. That's the only thing I'm going to advise you to do, right? If you were to not punish them, so to speak, by pointing to the police or like depriving them of something that they wanted from you. If as soon as you release them, so to speak, from the consequences of their actions, they go back to doing what they were doing before, and they just don't care, right? They just don't care. The only time they'll ever admit they were wrong, the only time, and if someone was to speak to them while they're doing bad things, they will say, "Yeah, I'm going to do it, because I want to do it. I like to do it. I'm being authentic," whatever, right? They'll say it like that, justify it like that, and they only regret when there is punishment, but they don't intrinsically regret what they did. Okay. What do you do to those people? Right? What do you do? Well, obviously you can't do anything, but what should God do to those people? If everyone will worship God, if everyone must worship God, and we will all serve in the end, and that's the point. That these people will only ever worship God or have any consideration for him or have any taqwa for him when they are being punished. And in Jannah, that is the abode of the grateful. Why? Because the people that will go to Jannah will still be grateful after going to Jannah, will still be grateful after going to paradise, and they will still worship him. So everyone will go in the afterlife to the place where they will best worship God. And that is one answer to it. But the revelation of Islam is so elegant. There's other answers which are just as amazing. Secondly, a smaller point is why would someone go to Jahannam for longer than the crime that they took to commit the crime? If you spent 2 minutes killing someone, just 2 minutes killing somebody, does that mean you should go to jail for 2 minutes? Right? Does that mean you should go to jail for 2 minutes? Well, no, it depends on the gravity of the crime. Okay, so what's the gravity of the crime of denying the unlimited, infinite creator his right over you as a creature that he made from nothing to something, right? What is the magnitude of that crime, right? Some people say if you were to slap your friend across the face, some guy or girl, if you're a girl, or slap your mother and father across the face, the action is exactly the same. But why would people say that the latter is greater than the former? Well, it's the significance behind what you've done is much greater, even though the action is exactly the same. So then what would be the case of being ungrateful to the creator of the universe, who's maintaining you, sustaining you, and is giving you so many favors? The magnitude of that would be far greater than the time it took you to commit the act in the first place. That is, if you don't repent from it. So anyway, I hope that answers it in a very short way, but a more systematic way is given in that article. And I'll also be covering it with possibly a few more angles in the course, inshallah.
I'm going to go to the next one. when will the help of Allah come for the oppressed Muslim communities of the world? I'm asking this question because all of Muslim parts of the Muslim world have at least one community which is oppressed. You have Kashmir is yours, Muslim in Thailand, Philippines, Vietnam, Afghanis, and the list goes on here, yani. And then is there also Islamophobia in the then there's also Islamophobia in the West, and also dictatorship in Central Asia, Arab world, which makes the situation worse.
That is a more political question. I know I already answered something that was kind of similar to that. I would say that well, what does the Quran say about, what does the creator of the universe say about this, right? Maybe not about this, but let's say about this generic situation that seems similar to something that seems to match what the author of the Quran has spoken about. So do you think that basically, we'll be made and not be tested with our wealth and our health and our family, right? Do you think that we are going to be not tested, right? That we're going to have a nice, comfortable life where your purpose of life is to go around to fancy locations around the world and take a picture of you drinking artisanal coffee, all right? Is that you think your purpose of life is, right? It's not going to be like that. Secondly, is that because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has purchased our lives, He's purchased the lives of the believers, right? We have a mission that we adopted when we said La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, to spread Islam and the justice of Islam, which is no other than just the law that manages human nature and the natural law for human beings to mankind, right? That's our job. You're not doing the job that you're signed up to do. So what's going to happen is that God's going to remind you by removing all the things that are distracting you at work. If you have someone that's working at work and they're distracted by, I don't know, Facebook or YouTube or something, and they're not doing any work, you're going to try to remove those distractions. So if your comfortable life is going to distract you from your mission as Muslims, which is to spread the revelation to mankind and ensure everyone gets access to it and the ability to live by it, then Allah's going to remind you by taking away those distractions, which means He's going to make Allah knows best His will, by the way, but it seems to me that an explanation that would seem to fit is that Allah will remind us. But we know there's some ayahs in the Quran that Allah will send punishments that will affect the wider people if you don't command the good and forbid the evil. And we know these are hadiths, so I'm speaking based on that. As to what Allah is willing in this particular case, Allah alone knows best, but it seems to fit with what He's warned us about in the hadith and the verses of Quran and so on. And of course, what did the Prophet Muhammad say? That in terms of the Islamic civilization was meant to be expanding and to fight for justice and defend the borders. And if to paraphrase the narration, I believe, if we were to give up jihad meaning fighting for justice, defending our borders, and spreading Islam to the world against oppressors, those who are oppressing people or killing people and doing bad things, then they'll be attacking us. To paraphrase the narration, they're going to be attacking us, and lo and behold, we've proved the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu right, which is we're being invaded, attacked, persecuted, and so on and so forth, constantly and consistently. And it's not going to get better, I don't think, just by doing nothing on that. It's only going to get better when we implement Islam, we unite ourselves, we have a government that represents the Islamic purpose and worldview and world project and takes on it its world project. And then via this government, the government will unite the Muslims and defend the weak amongst non-Muslims and oppressed, because there are non-Muslims being oppressed that need our help just as much as Muslims, and no one's fighting for them and defending them. And that's meant to be our purpose. And this was all part of bearing witness to God, right? All this was part of our purpose of bearing witness to God, which is people see that we're doing this not for material benefit or ourselves, but we're doing this because there is a creator behind the universe, which we will all be accountable for. And all mankind needs to realize and recognize this purpose, which they have currently forgotten in many parts of the world.
No. So there was a question I was going to ask, but before that, somebody had a follow up to your question about let's go back up here. Is hell predestined, or are people predestined for hell? And then in the chat, I guess some discussion is taking place about refuting ex-Muslims, and people are putting their own personal opinions. So I think you probably should chime in on that also, how to deal with people who leave Islam within the family. But go ahead, inshallah.
Okay, so when we talk about predestined, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala controls all things and certainly knows everything that will happen, because he's the one that's bringing it about. Now, I'm not going to get into theological debates that exist between Islamic scholars as to, is God outside of time and therefore, and he just makes everything already, and everything's already made and created, or he just follows a plan that he's written out, or that his writing out of it is making it come about. These are discussions which are between Islamic scholars and are fascinating, but essentially you only need to know the basics, and the basics is that everything will happen as Allah's planned, and therefore is for all intents and purposes, whatever your theological position, is predestined, right? However, you don't know what that predestination is, but Allah does, and you still have free will. But Allah's knowledge isn't limited by a wait and see approach to your free will, because he knows what your free will is going to do. Remember, he knows hypotheticals, right? His knowledge is not limited to only what happens, right? He knows every decision you'll make freely, because his knowledge isn't limited to requiring determinism, right? That's my point. So he knows what you're going to do, and he creates your actions, as in he permits your actions to come about, right? And therefore there you would do it. So you might be predestined, and he might know exactly where you're going, but you don't know where you're going, and you still have free will. So from all intents and purposes to yourself, you can still decide, so to speak, with obviously with Allah's permission, where you want to go in the hereafter, right? You want to repent and be a believer and get to Jannah, or you want to reject God and go to Jahannam. For all intents and purposes, this is the choice. This is within your choice, so to speak. But ultimately, obviously, everything happens by Allah's permission, and Allah knows exactly where you're going to go. So there's no contradiction if you basically understand that you're making an assumption that God needs to wait to see for things to happen, to know what they would be like, or that if he knows what they're going to be like, he forces it to happen regardless of whether people have free will or not. That's not the case, because again, we're dealing with an entity, a being that has knowledge beyond, is infinite, and his knowledge is not contained within determinism or causality as we as finite beings experience. So don't anthropomorphize God, right? He's not a creature like us. He's not a finite thing.
All right. So
I forgot there was an ex-Muslim part to that question, so to speak. Okay, I'm going to say something which is, if you don't know how to answer the questions by ex-Muslims, don't engage them in debate. What you can do is, you can, if they obviously speak to you about stuff, which is if they on Twitter or you see their YouTube video of them, don't call in on their phone lines, because they'll make an example out of your ignorance. Trust me, you fuel their phone lines, right? You fuel their videos. Don't do that. Speak to them. If you can answer the question, answer it. If not, you say, I don't know the answer to that question, so I'm going to go and research it, and maybe I'll get back to you, or I'll write an article, or what have you, right? Learn to say when you don't know. Please, don't make it worse. And sometimes you think you know the answer to something, and it's not the case, right? It's just not the case. You make it worse by making an assumption or a presumption on the matter. I'll give you a typical example. I once appeared on the BBC on a discussion about can you be gay Muslim, right? Now they thought I was going to be some ranting Muslim that would just say, that you can't be gay and Muslim, right? Or homosexual and Muslim, right? But hear me out here, 1 second, hear me out. You had these two sisters on the audience who said, how can you be gay Muslim, right? Just like you can't. And what the audience heard from that, how they understood it is that if you have a desire in your heart that you don't choose, yeah? And trust me, we all have sinful desires we don't choose, right? You can't say, well, I can't be a Muslim because I've got sinful desires. That's what it sounded like to the non-Muslim audience. Because when they say homosexual or gay, they don't mean someone who actually, it doesn't necessarily mean someone who actually has same-sex intercourse. It just means someone who has a desire or a preference strong enough to be sexually attractive to them, right? As an emotion. So when they said that, thinking they were defending Islam, it made us look worse. It possibly undid some of my work, which I had a more nuanced approach, which is I said that same-sex intercourse is haram, it's a sin, right? But just by having a desire doesn't mean that you're going to go hell just because you have a desire, right? And we know this from the hadith. Allah has forgiven us our desire, the whisperings of our nafs, yeah, as long as you don't act on it, the bad ones, right? As long as you don't act on it, yeah? So it was a bit nuanced. So when you use the word homosexual, you have to, it's not precise. And therefore, when Muslims were jumping in to explain it, they were making a mess. Other things they do when someone says, what's wrong with same-sex intercourse between two consenting adults? And then Muslims say, well, the reason why it's wrong is because it spreads disease and that is that really the argument that the Quran uses or the Hadith uses against it, right? It's not. You're speculating, yeah. And then what if they can show, if it's possible to show that it doesn't cause damage or it doesn't cause harm by disease, then you're stuck, yeah. And many Muslims get doubts from this, right? They have doubts based on this because they've heard the wrong argument. Or their argument, they've made the assumption or they've been taught the assumption. So now I brought it up, I must answer, of course. Here's what the argument, here's how you should present it from, and this is a Quranic argument. It's a straightforward argument, right? And if you want, you can just be clever of how you say it. So it's a good way of, when I mean clever as in use modern language to explain the Quranic concept. So basically, they'd say, you say to them, what is bad? What would be a crime between two adults? Right? What would be a crime? They'd say, well, non-consensual sex would be a crime. Say, okay, why is non-consensual sex a crime? And they will say, well, because you're violating someone's rights or whatever. Okay, but what rights are you violating? Yeah, like why is it wrong? In essence, I want to know why. Break it down. Don't just accept the concept. Ask them the question. Why is it wrong? They'll say, well, look, it's your body. No one should have the right to do to your body anything you don't consent to. Say, oh, because you are the owner of your body. I say, okay, so you're saying that it is wrong to touch someone's body without the consent of the owner of the body. And they say, yeah. Right, you see where I'm going with this, right? Okay, well, did you make yourself? Then they'll say, no. Did you create yourself in any way, shape, or form? Did you buy yourself from the creator of yourself? Right? And I'll say, well, no. So then how do you own your body? Where did you get this idea in the cosmos that you own your body, that you own yourself? Yeah. And if you're arguing against a materialist, you can have some more fun, which is you are a collection of matter. What is doing the owning, right? Are you saying an object can own itself? A bunch of matter can own itself, right? What does that say? What's doing the owning, right? So in essence, they would, they wouldn't be able to philosophically justify why they own themselves. Well, I have a basis. The creator of the universe and owns you, and he doesn't give you consent to use his property or misuse it in ways that he doesn't, that is not in accordance with the law that he stipulated as for us as a creation. There you go. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? I don't know if people follow that.
Yeah, I think there was a thought. And how about when it comes to family members? Like, you know, don't they have family members who leave Islam, or what are the like? How did you deal with those situations in those cases?
Well, I mean, I would say, a lot of this should be asked of experts who are counselors, and because family matters are something that obviously are a little more sophisticated than the intellectual matters that I usually deal with. And while I have obviously had some experience with this, I would never purport to be an authority on this matter, and I could only ever give you advice that carries no more authority than your neighbor or something, some average guy on the street. Yeah, so I don't think I could ever give you advice that has any authority on the matter, other than engaging with what is causing that person to have doubts. And sometimes what's causing that person to have doubts is not necessarily intellectual, because humans are they have parallel processes, right? They have aql and nafs, and so we're meant to have that, and there's a wisdom behind that. It's a necessity to have that. The nafs is a much faster processor than the aql, because you have to have instinctual reactions that are quicker, right? But also more powerful, and hence, the battle between aql and nafs is such that you have one that can make conceptual models, and the other one enacts pre-programmed subroutines that are meant to be for quick reaction to events. It helps you survive. Anyway, so some people have nafsiyya problems with Islam, or at least the Islam that was taught to them, or at least they live in a situation that might be unjust and unfair, and they're just taught like, be patient, just be patient. This is what Islam, you must be patient according to Islam. And the word patience means to them, do nothing, right? Just do nothing. Not try to be proactive in a positive way, or find a good strategy around this, or think a way of how to resolve the situation in the best way possible. No. Sabr means do nothing. When in Quran and Sunnah, sabr doesn't mean do nothing at all. Sabr just means being steadfast, doing the same actions to do good, but staying on those actions, like sticking to those good actions until you get the result you want. So basically, it's persistence or steadfastness in doing the good things, not being passive and doing nothing. So again, more assumptions are there which cause people to have these problems. So it depends what's making them leave Islam. So I would say that the best way against doubts is to inoculate yourself firstly with knowledge, and to speak to non-Muslims or ex-Muslims. Don't always approach them by saying you've sold out Islam for the West or what have you, because like no one's going to say, oh, now you put it that way, you're right. Okay, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu Muhammad rasulullah. Is that going to happen? It's not going to happen like that, right? That's not it's like saying to someone who's jahil that you're jahil. They're not going to say, oh, well, you're right, you've got a point there. They're not going to say that, right? They're going to think you're arrogant, or they're going to think that you're just insulting them. You're going to be being defensive. No. All you can do is you do the same to them as you would do with non-Muslims. You draw the straight line next to the crooked, right? You make clear to them, okay, look, what is your issues? Is it a personal problem, or a family problem, a social problem? Maybe we can resolve that. What is causing you to have these problems emotionally? Or is it just an intellectual problem? So are you just having something that's perplexing you and having doubts? And you need to learn yourself. You need to challenge your own assumptions as well. and encourage Muslims to also study Islam from obviously challenging their assumptions. Otherwise, you have to inoculate them with rationality, with some people call it critical thinking, but it's just rationality and understanding, basically. And that's the only way I can recommend. But understanding, you must be understanding with people who are calling themselves ex-Muslim or non-Muslim, because for many times they do it. Some of them do it because they generally don't have good answers from Islam. And I tell you this: if it wasn't for my persistence, you know, I made the mistake at a young age of only being I was only 4 years a Muslim, and I fell into perhaps Speaker's Corner in London, where you had all kinds of not ex-Muslims, anti-Islam Christians, so these really rabid evangelicals who were the predecessors of these guys you might see on YouTube, and they were saying similar stuff you never even heard of. There was someone had this they wrote articles saying 1,001 mistakes in the Quran. I was like, 1,001 mistakes in the Quran? What? I actually I wasted a lot of paper. I printed out all of it. You know, this is back in the day, you know, of in the 90s, yeah. So it was the era of printing stuff out, and I started to go through it. And even with my little knowledge, I saw mistakes or problems in this so-called article saying there was mistakes in the Quran, even with my limited knowledge. But I fell into the deep end of people, which I would recommend Muslims do not fall into the deep end with if you're prone to having doubts. But it sharpened me because I started to ask questions and I started to investigate. But I would say that you need to investigate and ask the questions from right now, because it will only help you and improve your understanding and improve you as a Muslim, and allow you to actually better understand how to apply Islam in the world. That's a general answer, but basically, don't react emotionally to ex-Muslims or and so on, or non-Muslims generally, but try to calmly ask them intellectually what their issues are. And if it's a nafsiya issue, if it's an issue that they let's say maybe a woman was married to an abusive husband, the husband tried to claim that he was Islam permits him to be a bad husband, which it doesn't, then explain to her how that it wasn't Islam that made him do that, right? And it was wrong, and so on and so forth. That's how you need to approach, right? No one has ever benefited by aggressive responses to people, and many of them come back to Islam with further research and thinking. Of course, there are people who left Islam for other reasons, that it's just they've chosen willfully to disregard any possibility of there being a creator, because they just don't, they want to enjoy themselves with short-term material pleasures. And these people are the true rejectors. And of course, you can't do anything for them. But there are many people who would be Muslim if it wasn't just, would come back to Islam if it wasn't just for proper explanation of Islam to them. So I hope that gives you some kind of an answer anyway to have to do.
Yeah, I know we said 11th, but this is a question I want this ask. It's a pretty long question, so is it okay if I ask it real quick, inshallah? And the question is, with the rise of, I guess, e-learning, there has been a lot of progress in the field of technology and networks, or neural networks, which are the kind, but not exact hierarchies in the human brain, having managed to learn things in a surprisingly accurate manner. The question is, there's a quote by this mathematician, Stuart G-Man, which is quite a lot in this field. The world is compositional, or God exists. What that means, there is inherent compositionality and structure in the world and within our brains, layers of neurons, and this is how infants learn. If this structure did not exist, then some higher intelligence was the reason why these infants learn what they learn. When these neural networks began to learn awesome stuff in the past decade, these researchers triumphantly concluded and mentioned in their keynotes that, see, there is compositionality, and therefore God does not exist. How do we intellectually counter this line of thinking?
Okay, so computing question. Many people are confused by the terms artificial intelligence because they don't know what it means. Certainly, they don't know what the word intelligence means. Not in a derogatory way, but I mean literally, definitionally. Most people who speak English will probably not be able to define intelligence as a word generally. And therefore artificial intelligence, which sounds, and we say, oh, we're intelligent, and artificial intelligence, it means that, you know, there's a non-living inanimate thing that can have intelligence just like us. You know, doesn't that challenge our ideas of the soul or consciousness or so on and so on and so forth? First and foremost, no, it does. Firstly, I don't see how they jump from just because things are compositional, that there must that, you know, that can also be explained by there being no God, right? The jump isn't clear, right? They just make a jump thing, trying to saying that it just means, oh, there's no need for God because the universe is just independently by itself compositional, and therefore there's no need for God. What I will say is evolutionists would argue that the minds of creatures or ourselves were constructed in such a way that to make sense of a world that was the way it was, and so whatever the world was going to be like, we were always going to be able to make sense of it as a necessity for survival, right? So that's that. They would, materialists could counter that against these particular materials. They're against each other. But to understand artificial intelligence, it is a mindless process, and I'm going to give you an analogy to understand it, so you know what it's referring to. So, imagine you had imagine you had a classroom filled with kids, and then they don't know how to speak Chinese. So you start bringing in Chinese characters on square blocks and just putting them down, and tell them each to guess what it means, what the Chinese character means. So they all make guesses, guess, and most get it wrong, some get it right. So then you chuck out those who got it wrong, and you keep those who get it right, and then you bring more in, and you give another character, and you keep this process going until those who get it right, or not once they get it right, maybe get closer to the truth, the meaning, the guess about what the Chinese character means, are the closest out of all of the students. So you keep doing that process again and again and again and again and again with people who don't really know what these characters mean generally, but they just tend to get the guesses. They get more and more better guesses, right? Due to randomness, because each student might have a random preference, random guessing ability, and what have you. So you just happen to get, you only leave those who basically get close, get the closest, the top tier, top 10%, and then you run the process again and again and again and again and again. And if you keep doing it, you'll get to a point where you'll have someone after tens of thousands, 100,000 of guesses that will get consistent guesses on the Chinese characters, or even maybe most of the time knowing what they knew beforehand. So knowing that, for the 10,000 times this character looks like this, and they got it almost right. So this character looks similar to that, might be related to it, and so they learn by their guesses. But essentially, it's a process of randomness and selecting, or survival of the fittest made into a computational form, right? If that, for want of a better way of explaining it. So that's all it is. You might know it when you're asked to authenticate to yourself as a real person, not a bot, by those called CAPTCHA. It's called CAPTCHA squares, where you have to say, select if you prove you're not a bot, select how many cars are the squares that have cars in it, all that kind of stuff. In essence, they train the AI computer to recognize cars, not by recognizing it conceptually, but by getting the rough general shape by this trial and error process, where in essence you're using randomness and survival of the fittest to create a program that will recognize shapes, or recognize or fit the shape, and so on and so forth. And that's a very simplified way of explaining artificial intelligence. There's no actual intelligence being operated on or being used, and so on and so forth. So there really is no intelligence. There's no intelligence, but it's called artificial intelligence because they say, oh, we can make these really complicated switches called computers to be able to simulate output similar to someone who is intelligent, or to intelligence, right? That's basically what it is. It's a simulacra. It's not real intelligence. Again, I don't see the jump between just because there's compositionality, it means there's no God. I don't, in the universe, I don't see that at all. And other materialists could counter that, could make a counter argument if they were so inclined anyway, that our minds developed, they would argue, to recognize and make sense of the external inputs that we're receiving from the world to better survive in the world, almost like the process of artificial intelligence on biological creatures, right? Yeah, but again, there's some problems with that, major problems with that. But again, the logic doesn't flow. It doesn't connect. So maybe if you want to show me a more sophisticated argument that they bring to show that connection, or if there is none, then I suppose there's none. But if there's a more sophisticated argument they bring, then I'm open to hearing it. But I still haven't heard any that would follow. The conclusion would follow from those premises.
Jazakumullah khair. May Allah bless you, reward you for your time. And mashallah, yani, it's been 4 hours. May Allah reward you, yani, and immensely for your time and effort, and all those who stayed along the whole time. And we ask Allah subhanahu that we're able to continue these things and have these discussions, inshallah bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Jazakallah khair, and inshallah we'll see.
I think are a very good resource that we don't have much of. So for whoever's interested, you did reference in your presentation a few articles you've written where you were able to break it down, and it could help somebody who may be more visual than auditory learner to have that as a reference. But also, as you were saying, a lot of us will struggle with some of these issues in a discussion. So it's good for everybody to kind of save on your hard drives, good resources just generally. So I would advise people to look up some of your publications and writings, and you have a pretty well organized website with some of them. So Jazakallah khair for that. And I would suggest that people familiarize themselves, or at least give themselves access to your previous writings.
So, barakallah feek, brother, for obviously staying the course this long, and for obviously listening, and obviously for the organizers, Jazakallah khairan, for inviting me. And as I said, like I tried to answer as many questions as possible, time permitting, because I wanted it to be as thorough as possible. And inshallah, as I said, if ever you need any more kind of such sessions, maybe if you want to focus on any particular topics and things, or discuss, I think usually there's a problem with liberalism and secularism, and also more right-wing and left-wing ideologies, which are neither from Islam. Then those, inshallah, I'm also happy to obviously help discuss those matters. But barakallah fikum, and once again for organizing this, and inshallah I hope to work with you again in the future, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khair. And it's a special shout out to Team for USF. You had Jum'a Zayd Jurayda, who's also the co-host from Team USF, and all those who participate in the system. Jazakumullah khair. May Allah reward you all for putting this together, and inshallah we'll continue some of this in the future. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.